Hi, Laura.
There she is.
Hi. Sorry, the links just kept kicking me out. I know you sent all the links, Jeremy. I tried.
Matching mug.
Always something, Lynn. I don't have a Sierra scarf. Oh, there's probably a Sierra scarf in my house somewhere, but I don't have one at the moment.
Laura, just so you know,
Sponsor
we're
swag.
live.
No problem.
Okay. So we're just waiting for one more panelist. I'm going to start and cross my fingers she joins us. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Franca Palazzo. I'm VP of Growth for iPolitics, and I volunteer as the Executive Director of the Internet Society Canada chapter. I want to welcome you all to day 2 of the 3rd annual Digital Access Day. We had a great day yesterday. We discussed connectivity in Canada and how internet access can help to advance diversity and inclusion. I'm super excited about today's topics. We're going to be discussing how the challenges that are faced by content and broadcast platforms to remove online hate and misinformation. We'll be discussing equitable education in a digital world, the importance of cybersecurity, and we'll finish by talking about the Mitigating IoT Security Threats for Consumers project we're working on with the US Embassy. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the President of the Internet Society Canada chapter, Lynn Hamilton, to say a few words. Lynn?
Welcome, everyone, and welcome back to those who joined us yesterday. My job today is to thank all the wonderful people who helped make this possible. So our platinum sponsor is the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. They share research and resources on women entrepreneurs in Canada. They're made up of 10 regional hubs. They operate in both official languages and include a network of over 250 organizations reaching more than 100,000 women entrepreneurs. They're part of the Government of Canada's Women Entrepreneurship Strategy that aims to increase women entrepreneurs' access to financing, talent, networks, and expertise. Using a methodology developed by the Boston Consulting Group and the Cherie Blair Foundation, it's estimated that by closing the gender gap in entrepreneurship in Canada, we could add anywhere from 41 to 81 billion to our GDP. It's a fabulous organization. We thank them for their generosity. They had an amazing panel yesterday hosted by Wendy Kukier. I also want to mention our mothership, the Internet Society Global. They provide us with so much advice and leadership and support, and we're so grateful to be a part of a global organization of thought leaders. CIRA is our founding sponsor and helped the chapter in our early days get started. Their seed money was pivotal to our success, and their ongoing support has been tremendous. Thank you, CIRA, especially for the best corporate swag ever. And I can't forget iPolitics. They promote us, they support us, and especially in these times when financial support is even harder to get, they have been a true and constant friend of the society, so thank you to them. And finally, last but not least, there is Franca and Jeremy who actually make all of the logistics of these days possible. They are the magic makers from putting the panels together and making the day actually happen. We are so lucky to have them. So thank you guys for everything that you do. And finally, now is the time that I ask all of you, if you care about a free and open internet, one that's accessible and affordable for all Canadians as I do, I urge you to become a member. It's very simple. There's a simple link. Franca will make sure she follows up and sends it to all of you. We'll send you reminders for all of our events and keep you up to date on all the things that are going on from a policy perspective with some of Canada's greatest internet thought leaders. We can't do this without you, and we really could use your individual support. Thank you all for joining us today and participating. I know it's going to be an action-packed agenda, and that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lynn. So now I'd like to introduce the first panel of the day, Toward a Trustworthy Internet. We're super lucky to have a journalist and author whom I have huge admiration for, Susan Delacourt. Thank you so much for agreeing to moderate, and I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, you guys. Thanks for the chance to participate. I think we're all still getting, even though this is an internet event, I guess we're all still getting used to the idea of these being so virtual. I'm sitting here in my living room, talking to everybody else in their living room, which is, I guess, sort of peak internet. So I'm very happy to, I think we're still awaiting one panelist. So I'm going to optimistically start introducing our panelists and hope that the third one gets here very soon. Why don't we start with Laura? Hi, Laura. Laura is Executive Director of the community-based nonprofit organization Open Media. She's a digital policy expert and grassroots activist whose work has helped make the internet access and policy into key election issues in Canada. I'm all about elections. That seems good to me. Steve Dier leads government affairs and public policy for TikTok in Canada. I don't think he's going to do any cruising around on a skateboard and drinking cranberry juice for us, but everybody gets that joke, right? He joined TikTok this past summer after nearly 4 years at Amazon Canada, running their government relations, and previously worked for the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., where I bet he's glad he's not right now. And Heather Bakken will be with us. I'll reintroduce her, but she's the publisher and vice president of iPolitics. I made that little reference to the US because I think that's a really good place to start this discussion. And I think what we talked yesterday about how broad this subject is, but what we're looking at really is sort of limits on the internet, on this big open space. And I think it's interesting, in the past few weeks, we have seen Twitter, at least, and other social media companies cracking down on the US president, now starting to label his content or flag it, as it's put. And I think when a lot of us thought about limits on the internet, we actually thought it would work the other way around, that it would be the president of the United States putting limits on the internet companies. But everything in 2020 is upside down, so why not that be? But I think that's a good way into the discussion of, if we are going to talk about some kind of limits or controlling content, where should it start? Does it start with the state? Let's leave Donald Trump out of it. Is this going to be a job for the private sector, or is this going to be something we want to leave in individual people's hands? And I think we've all been wrestling with that, but every one of our panelists have been thinking about this issue. So I am going to shall we start with Steve and your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks so much, Susan, and everyone at the Internet Society. Really appreciate the invitation to speak today, and super important subject that we're spending a lot of time thinking about and working on at TikTok. I think it's a really important question that you raised. Who does the responsibility lie with? And so I'll share from the TikTok perspective. We've already come out and said that we believe our entire industry needs to be held to an exceptionally high standard, and that in fact, all companies like ours should be required to disclose their algorithms and their moderation policies and their data flows to regulators. So for us, it's important that we do more than lip service to that as well. So we've taken the first step towards doing that. Earlier this year, we opened what we call our Transparency Center, which is a secure site where regulators and other experts can come and view the source code that's driving our algorithm, really actually see it, and observe in real time content moderation take place. We think it's really important for them to understand how that works and to see it firsthand. And this is something that, in my role here in Canada, on the public policy side, that we've been reaching out and want Canadian regulators and policymakers to be able to take place and to understand how TikTok works and how we make those decisions, so that can inform them. But we think, I don't think the role and the responsibility lies with any one group. I think it is a shared responsibility, and we need to find a way to work together on that. So we're looking forward to having Canadians and experts in civil society. I'm sure there's some people watching this right now that would be important to take part in that. Yeah, it's never a mission accomplished moment for us either in ensuring the safety of our users and the moderation processes. So I'm happy to, as we go through this panel, give you some more information on how we do that.
Can you just give us an example, Steve, of how that real-time moderation would work? Like just maybe a recent example of how it would work for somebody like me who doesn't really understand that?
Sure. So essentially how we do moderation at TikTok is we have our guidelines. So if you go to our website right now, there's our community guidelines, which are public, and those tell everyone what is and is not allowed on our platform. And it's in plain English, and it's very clear, and it's things like hate speech and bullying and pornography and sexual exploitation, things like that. How we enforce those is we have our policies, and then we have both machine moderation, which is good at picking up certain things, like a machine can recognize what a weapon looks like, and it's very easy for us to be able to flag something like that. And then we have human moderators, and there's other types of things, particularly like hate speech, that context, and you need that contextual view to understand and to properly moderate. And so we have a 24-hour model, both technology and people, that are constantly viewing and reviewing these videos to make sure that they meet our community guidelines. And when they don't, we take them down. I can give you an example, actually. Earlier this year, we released what we call our transparency report, and it covered the first 6 months of 2020, where globally, TikTok removed 104 million videos that were in violation of our community guidelines in terms of service. Now, that may sound like a big number, but that's actually less than 1% of all videos that were uploaded to TikTok. In terms of how the moderation process takes place, 90%, actually over 90% of those videos that we removed were taken down before they received a single view on the platform. So we're very quick at being able to action these and take them down. And over 96% of them were removed before they were ever reported to us by another user. So again, as I said, there's never a mission accomplished moment. We're always working towards this, and we aspire to be the industry leader in transparency and safety and accountability. But we think it's an important conversation to continue having between ourselves, government, and civil society to understand how we can best do this and best inform our policies.
That's really good. So we'll come back to that. You raised a whole bunch of really interesting issues there. Laura, what do you think? You're all about openness. It's in your name. So I know that this is almost asking for the opposite of that. What are the limits on openness that you see, and who makes them?
It does sound counterintuitive to our name, I know. I think, to your question around who's responsible, I think all three bodies you named are responsible. I think that there's a role for government, there's a role for companies, and there's a role for users. And I think where a lot of these discussions get quite mixed up or jumbled or muddied is when we're really talking about which aspect of the process should those bodies be involved in. So when you're looking at what is illegal, I think that's where the government has a role to play. What is content that is in that country fundamentally illegal content? And that is the government's decision to decide. I think when it starts getting into questions like what is acceptable or what is appropriate, I think that's where there has to be a lot more power in the hands of platforms to determine what is the type of platform they're trying to curate. They might not want certain content on their platform, even if it's legal, because that's not the type of platform they're building. And by the same token, users may not want to see content that is perfectly acceptable or legal, but isn't aligned with their values or is just inappropriate for their children or whatever that might be, that doesn't make it illegal, but it's just something they don't want to see. And so I think we need to look at within each of those pieces what the role is. But I think to what Steve was getting at, one of the issues really is that transparency from start to finish. When content is being flagged, is it because it's illegal? Is it because it's in violation of a terms of service? What is the process if something is in violation of a terms of service, and what are the penalties? And I think that's been a really big black box for people for a really long time. If we look, I'm less familiar with TikTok, so I will let Steve off the hook on this one and say, if you look at something like Facebook, where users have had their content taken down or their accounts blocked and they can no longer access the platform, but they don't even know why they've been blocked necessarily. And there's no process or transparency around how to handle that. If they think there's been a mistake, what is the platform that, or the process they can use to restore their accounts? And I think a lot of the solutions that we're talking about are really big and sweeping and miss a lot of the nuance in how we actually want the internet to function 5-10 years from now. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now is that there actually aren't a lot of platforms. There's not a lot of places to have those conversations. And we kind of expect them to do everything for everyone. If someone gets kicked off of Facebook, that's not just a place where they want to share pictures with their family. In a lot of cases, it's the only way to access event registrations, or it's the only way to manage work accounts they have to have accounts for. And so, you know, there's a lot of layers to that equation. And I think we'll probably get into this over the next hour, but I think a lot of the solutions that we are looking at, what from Open Media's perspective, we want to make sure that that protects people's voices online, that it's not proactively taking down very legitimate content, and not empowering companies or governments to have excessive power where they are now controlling users. But how do we actually put users at the heart of that while obviously maintaining some responsibility? And that's a long way of roundabout saying, hey, Susan, it's complicated, but we've got an hour and I think we'll get somewhere good over the course of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, Laura, and I'm going to get a drink of water. I'm not disappearing, but I have a glass of water here. I do not have COVID, I don't think. I think you both referred to the standards and how much of a gray area that is. And how do we sort that out? Like, we in the newspaper business or in journalism business sort through those gray areas every day, but how do you do it in this area? You know, you can make all of us know what some hate speech looks like, but we're not sure about it too. For example, who wants to meet the person who decided to put a flag on Donald Trump's tweet? Like what rules who's going to make those rules? And I'm going to get a glass of water, but I can hear you all.
I mean, Steve, you probably have like an actual technical answer to this question, but I think the concept around who put the flag on Donald Trump's tweets, I think the concern that, you know, we have as users is, well, our tweets have been flagged or deleted for years, and the standards are being unequally applied. And I understand Twitter's justification of thinking that it's in the public interest and there's reasons why certain things are left up and certain things aren't. But I think that lack of consistency and lack of transparency around how and when decisions are made is really where, from the user's perspective, we get stuck, because we don't have the power of the office of the President of the United States to justify why our content should or shouldn't stay up. And yet you watch content that is clearly in violation of terms of service being left up for other reasons. So I'm curious, maybe from your perspective, Steve, I actually don't know if the president has a TikTok account, so I can't say if you've had to come into that question, but how you can guarantee that, or can't, and maybe the challenge is in trying to apply those rules consistently, because I think that's really where we run into challenges as users, trying to understand why we're different or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and for us, you know, transparency, accountability, and trust. You know, we need our users to trust us, and we need to earn that trust and build that trust. Specifically on the issue of, you know, what happens if you post violative content that violates our community guidelines or our terms of service, and you'll get a notice saying, you know, we have remove this content or we have blocked your account. And again, it depends on the type of infraction, but it tells you why. It will point to what you violated within the community. You posted hate speech, you posted pornography, you posted violent content. The users are then given there's a button you can press to appeal that, where you can send a message and say, no, it was a mistake. You can go through that process. The other thing we're doing actually too, because, you know, it's not just one thing, the suicide and self-harm, that's something that we take very seriously in that type of content. So, if a user posts content that talks about that in a way that violates our community guidelines, but they may need help with what they're dealing with, and so we'll include in that message, and we're continuing to build on this, links or to organizations that provide support for people that are dealing with those issues. So we think it's important. There's an educational piece there as well, but going back to what you said, Laura, accountability, we know that's huge. We know users need to understand why decisions are made, and we try to be very transparent with our community guidelines and how they're written. So it's not in legalese, it's not hard to access, and they're very clear. And I encourage everyone to take time to read them if they have a few minutes.
I'm going to have a look at some of the questions in the chat. Thank you, people, for putting questions into the chat line too. I encourage you to do that. As you guys are talking, it occurred to me a couple of months ago, I sat down with the Heritage Minister, who was talking about the limits they're thinking about putting on. And he's an environmental activist, and in his mind, he now has a comparison. I'd love to hear what you think of this. He is comparing now big tech and the internet giants to the big polluters of the 1980s, which I think is maybe some find quite unfair, but saying that we are in he is comparing the situation now in regulating the internet to what they had to do with the environment 30 years ago. First of all, do you think that comparison is fair or even apt? And what does that tell you about where we may be headed government-wise in limits? Laura, do you want to take that one, or Steve?
Yeah, I'll go first, Steve. I'll save you on that one. I think it's a nice comparison. I think it sounds really convenient, but I think there's again a lot of nuance being missed in the process. I think the biggest comparison that I would actually use in those two examples is actually the size and monopolistic tendencies of those companies. I think that it's the power and control of those companies as opposed to that might result in similar, problematic outcomes or problematic societal impacts. But I think that, data is the new oil has been this phrase that's been floating around. And I think there's a lot of good that can come from that's being washed away in that sentence, in implying that it's all bad. And I think, we can't lose sight of the fact that there's a reason that we use these platforms. Yes, very similarly to there's a reason that many of us drive cars. But I think that the real core issue here, which is a little bit bigger than any individual issue we're talking about in terms of types of content or types of moderation, is that there is a ton of control and monopoly over these platforms and over where we exist on the internet. The idea of the internet in the beginning was, wow, this has really leveled the playing field. Everyone is equal. If you can get online and put a few pieces of code in and understand how to navigate it, you have just as loud or powerful or equal a voice as anyone else. And I think, when you look around at the internet right now, if you look at the apps that you have on your phone, they're probably the same 5 or 10 apps that everyone else has. And some of them might actually be owned by the same company. And you might have 3 or 4 apps from a single company. If you're looking at Facebook, which owns Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram, that's 4 apps right there from a single company. And so if you're removed from that platform, what does that do to your ability to communicate where everyone else is? And so I think that, it's fun to hate on big tech. It's really easy and it's convenient because there are a lot of problems in the system. But I think that just by hating on them, that doesn't actually get at the fact of what do we, or get at the notion of what do we want the world to look like instead. And I think, if you use the big polluters example, we can talk about green energy, we can talk about renewable resources. And I'm not sure that we've got that equivalent picture on the platform side in a way that might be depicted in this, renewable versus not oil metaphor.
That's a really interesting. Steve, do you want to take a run at that? But I have another sort of related question for both of you on that one. Or do you want to just duck that one altogether?
I mean,
I'll weigh in.
I can say, like, listen, we're going to work, with the government. We think it's important that they understand our privacy and security and transparency practices, and we have, had some good conversations with Minister Guilbeault's department and other departments. And I mean, on the topic of Minister Guilbeault's department, another thing, and Laura kind of touched on this, like, what is the positive? Is it easy to hate on big tech? But there's a lot of good things that come out of that, and I think Canadians and users recognize that and value that. And for me, being at TikTok, something that's really that drew me to the company and that I've really loved about it is the engagement from Canadians and how they're using the platform and creating Canadian content. And it's not Canadian content, and this is probably better. A different panel that I'm sure Laura would have lots of thoughts on what to define as Canadian content. But for particularly younger people, this is where they're expressing themselves. This is, very local content, talking about their language, their stories on TikTok. And we're very honored to be able to host that and to provide a space for it. And I mean, especially there's a huge Indigenous TikTok community that is just amazing. We didn't build that, but we're very proud to, again, have created a space where they're able to tell stories in their own voices, share their culture. And there have been some huge successes. People have millions of followers teaching about their heritage and their culture. So, we think there's a lot of positives, and but we understand that where there are questions and concerns about how data is used and how we operate. And so we're going to continue having an open dialogue with government.
I want to ask both of you about COVID, but because we can't go a day without talking about that. But I want to ask a couple of questions that are in the chat stream too. They're very actually interesting one. And they go to your earlier points. What resources do the people who flag content, what do they have? Are they trained? Where does their guidance come from? And one was for you particularly, Steve, is does TikTok flag content that's against? Does it flag it or just take it down?
We don't have flags, is the short answer. So if something violates our content, it's taken down. In terms of the resources for and how that works. So we operate our content moderation. We call it our trust and safety team in a North American model. So those decisions for Canada and the US are made in, we have a leader, Eric Hahn, who's based in Los Angeles, and his team's there, and they're creating the policies and they're implementing those policies. We then have a follow the sun model because it's 24 hours of people around the world who are reviewing content and implementing those policies. But the decision making, the policy making is based in the US for our moderation.
And how often would it change? Is it like do the standards sort of get changed, week to week, day to day, hour by hour?
So we've made we once in a while we make tweaks to our community guidelines. So over the summer, we made an update around misinformation and disinformation, specifically around like deepfake videos, to explicitly prohibit those. So we make those additions sometimes, and when we do, we will put it in the blog post and explain to everyone what the change was and why and how it applies. Underpinning our policies, we do have playbooks that are more proprietary because bad actors were to have access to those, then they might be able to find ways to try and game our system and sneak ways through. But those are more granular guidance on how to interpret the broader community guidelines that govern what type of content is and is not allowed on TikTok.
I have just been alerted that Heather Bakken is here. I cannot see her on my screen, but sorry, Heather, and welcome.
No worries. Thank you, Susan.
Wherever you are. Heather is the publisher and vice president of iPolitics and Queen's Park Briefing, and she has previously worked at CBC for 16 years as a broadcast journalist. and she is certified in digital strategy and communications management. So Heather, you have been following along as sort of I guess I accidentally limited your content or flagged you.
You moved the goalpost, which I think is part of the problem with the last question you asked, is that I was just, preparing for today. I was looking at some of the blogs I wrote a few years ago when I was particularly outraged by the rise of the Me Too movement, and how Rose McGowan's tweet that was just basically calling something out was taken down. And when you looked at the user agreement or the terms of use or their policies on what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, the US president was violating pretty much every single one of them. And I think the problem has been that there is a constant moving of the goalpost. What we have, and no offense to you, Steve, I think TikTok is this it's a brilliant way to get your message across. And I particularly like some of the messages where young people, will be painting their toenails and talking about, voter suppression and surveillance in China, or Iran. It's brilliant. But for our purposes here, I think moving that goalpost constantly, we saw this last week with Steve Bannon, basically talking about beheading Dr. Fauci, and his tweet's taken down, but his account is not taken down. So what we have, and I think speaking to Laura's point as well, I tend to really agree with what she's talking about. We need more competition, but the reality is, and we also need oversight. The reality is we have a handful of tech executives who are making the decisions. They are unelected. We have officials that come in, they're not going to provide oversight. And do we really want them defining the user terms and agreements for the public forum? And we have Bannon coming on talking about beheadings. In France, a few weeks ago, a teacher was trying to talk about freedom of speech. There was stuff on social media. We know that lies spread 6 times faster than truth. And it ends up that the teacher was beheaded, and a picture of his head on a street was posted on Twitter. So the current systems in place to regulate hate speech and try to mitigate any of that from jumping into the real world clearly cannot address the scope and scale of the problem, at which point I think you need someone who has enforceable powers, like a privacy commissioner, information commissioner, who can impose production orders the way they do in the UK with Elizabeth Denham, who was also Canadian, and saw this happening 12 years ago in her thesis on Facebook. So she's able to go in and kind of dig deep in a nonpartisan way that I think in Canada we would benefit from having, as long as it's independent third party. So a combination of competition, oversight, and staying ahead of the curve. Technology is changing faster than our ability to cope with it. And Steve, you've talked about this. So transparency is a major piece of the puzzle. But if we have Mark Zuckerberg getting a subpoena to testify in Parliament in Canada, which is a G7 country, and he can ignore that subpoena, and he has power over our people, I think we've got to kind of tweak how we approach accountability.
Laura, did you want to take a first shot at answering that, or replying there to some of what Heather was saying?
Hi, Heather. Great. I think the oversight and accountability, I think the big question is, what does that look like in different jurisdictions? And I think where we typically get tripped up when it comes to issues of free speech, free expression, censorship, is what does it look like in Canada versus the US versus the rest of the world? And trying to take international companies and you do one of two things. You try and impose a very Western view onto companies, expecting that will be regulated and enforced globally, or you say, this is the rule here, and you normalize the fact that governments have that authority over these companies, which means that when you put those companies in the hands of other governments, that does a lot of different damage and can have a more problematic impact to those users who are trying to express themselves, which is, again, a long roundabout way of saying it's really complicated, and I don't take that for granted. And I think that's where there is a role for both. And when we look at things like illegal content, where the government and law enforcement very clearly has a role, they have no idea what to do with problematic content on the internet. They don't know what to do with harassment online. They don't know what to do with threats online. They don't know how to investigate it quickly enough. and it's not taken seriously. And sorry, go ahead, Heather.
No, it's tricky because in the US and in the Philippines, there's a great example with Maria Reza and Rappler. The governments are generating that content. It's the governments. So how does law enforcement and the judiciary provide oversight when someone like Duterte is coming on and threatening to kill a journalist and, you know, convicting her on trumped up legislation that didn't exist when her stories were published? So I agree with you. It's so nuanced and it is so specific to your area. But if we look at, you know, the International Panel on World Press Freedom, they're talking about kind of an international standard based on international human rights. So maybe there's a way to combine, you know, and that is very, I think, has a Western bias, to your point, but maybe there's a set of international standards that companies can agree to, and then it becomes jurisdictional. You know, the way we're seeing Australia handling it, the way we're seeing Canada trying to handle it. There's so many moving parts coming at us from 360 degrees. I just think there's no shiny solution to this. We can just move forward the best that we can and be as responsible as we can.
Steve, did you want to say something in response to what some of the points Heather was raising?
I mean, there's a lot of points there. There's one point, like, I guess kind of related that I wanted to come back to, and I think actually Laura may have raised it earlier, but, you know, also deciding, you know, what type of platform you want to be, and for users to have that choice and that decision. And I think that's a very important point, and a way that TikTok in particular is different than a lot of other content or social media platforms that are out there. You know, we pride ourselves in a place that, you know, inspires creativity and brings joy. And most of the videos are fun, entertaining to watch. It's a place for entertainment and self-expression and community. And so, you know, that's how we've structured our community guidelines. That said, we 100% welcome, you know, healthy and diverse discussion and debate and viewpoints among our users. And that is all welcome as long as it fits within our community guidelines, which, again, if you read them, will prohibit things like hate speech and bullying and misinformation. But it's a very important point. I think, you know, a good analogy is, like, you know, the things you talk about when you're at the office or at church or some setting might be different than the things you want to talk about and do if you're at a pub or at a baseball game or something. Like, there's a time and a place for these things, and I think users have that choice. And, you know, we want to ensure that our platform is a fun, welcoming place for all users.
Steve, that was a really nice throwback to the time where we could go to other places than our house.
You anticipate what I was going to ask you all to talk about. I like everything. COVID and the pandemic, I think, has sharpened every debate in Canada. Everything has made every debate just a little more intense. How do you think that, or do you think that the pandemic or the past 9 months, whatever, or 9 million years, however it feels like, have changed people's feelings about the internet and its uses? On the one hand, we rely so much more on it now, but I think we all knew it was a basic need. It has become a lifeline as well. But does a pandemic sharpen the discussion around free speech on it and the openness of it? That may be too big a question, but I think you know what I'm getting at. Is that has our reliance on this channel to communicate made us a little more aware, or changed the debate around openness or limits on the internet?
I will kick it off, but I will let everyone else weigh in as well. I think so. For those that were here yesterday, I think there were really great conversations around the need for access to the internet being more critical than ever and more visible than ever. And we've seen that in a priority from government. We've heard definitely from our community across the country what a barrier that is for every aspect of their life. And I think the thing that has been really, really highlighted over the course of the pandemic when it comes to internet use is that it's not just that it's a basic service that we should have. It's not just that it's kind of a way to keep connected. It's actually the gateway to everything else. So we've seen like government services be put online. So how do you access, your government employment benefit if you don't have the internet to log in and do it? That makes it a lot more complicated for you. How do you find testing sites when they've decided to go to an entirely appointment-based online system? You sit on hold, one testing site at a time on the phone. And like, there is a disadvantage at every step of your day by not having internet access or sufficient internet access. And I think on the flip side, for those of us watching today, participating today, who are fortunate enough to have sufficient internet access, we're doing way more of that. So, we're hearing some pushback around in our community, like, well, you have enough for email, that should be good enough, or like you can communicate with your teachers. Why do you need to watch? Maybe you don't get to watch Netflix. Maybe that's a luxury. Well, if you're stuck at home and you're trying to get out of your head, you're trying to distract yourself from the state of the world, you need joy, and that's the only thing that will bring it to you. That isn't a luxury. That's like an actual coping mechanism that you have and that you need. And so I think because the internet is our connection to our family, to our friends, to culture, to entertainment, to news, to our jobs, to education, healthcare, literally everything, it means that I spend a lot of time at this desk and I spend a lot of time staring at screens. And when I'm not on screens, I'm on my phone because that's my gateway to the world. And I think because we are using these platforms as our gateways to the entire world, it's really shaping what we see. And when you only have a handful of platforms to look at the world, beyond the news sites that you might visit or the communications direct with your friends and family, you're really left to what's out there. And so I think because we are spending more time on screens than ever during this pandemic, but we are also using all of the platforms that we are maybe concerned with more than ever during the pandemic, I think that it's really exacerbating people's awareness of it. So it's not necessarily that the issues themselves have changed, although there might be a case to make that actually has gotten worse as people have more time to spend on those platforms. But I think that it's really forced people to sit in it a little bit more, to actually have to think about it, to engage with it, to grapple with it. And then you add on top of it the actual, political issues that are going on that people are reading about. You add on a US election, you add on the issues we've been talking about, and people have the time to sit and mull it over in the same way that I think a lot of the protests that we saw coming up around issues like Black Lives Matter came from the fact that people were able to see it, they were able to interact with it, and they had more time to spend engaging with that content. Their day-to-day behavior couldn't just cover it up because they weren't too busy. They had the time to actually sit and read it or watch the videos and learn a little more. And I think that actually, is a positive example of it sparking a lot of engagement. And I think not all sparks go in positive directions. So I think it's probably gone in multiple ways.
That's a good answer. Heather, your thoughts?
I think that was really well said. I agree with Laura 100%. I think accessibility and affordability should be at the cornerstone of any policy now, especially in a country like Canada, where the geography has made it cost prohibitive for companies to provide access. So again, it's very nuanced and layered. So how do we make that public forum that social media companies are talking about? How do we actually make it a public forum and not a privileged forum, which it is in some places right now? And anyway, I think Laura, basically you underscored my approach to this. So I'm just going to say, I second that.
Steve, what do you think? Has COVID changed TikTok?
Yeah, that's I think Laura and Heather, both raised really important points, and wholeheartedly agree on access. I mean, we're a video content platform primarily, consumed through people's phones, and the sad reality is there's lots of places in Canada that don't have that access. And so, we're encouraged by some of the announcements we've seen from the government this week. And we think that's really important. And as for all the reasons that Laura laid out, and education as well, the ability, I have, it's a my son just turned 7, and he's had to learn how to use Zoom and Google Classroom and everything. But like these are skills that we need to make sure everybody has. Whether it's if they haven't done online banking before, haven't used Zoom or other platforms before, even e-commerce, if they're not able to just go to the store and are able to do that. Like those are all important things. And in terms of your question, Susan, on has it changed TikTok? Yes, and I think it's not a secret or a surprise to anyone that the popularity of TikTok went up a lot when people were stuck in their houses. And so there's been a lot of user growth, and for a lot of people just hadn't heard of TikTok before March. And even a lot of our biggest users right now and our biggest influencers didn't join until the lockdown began. And they said, hey, let's try this thing out. And they've created new careers for themselves. But really the most interesting thing that came out of all that is the sense of community and people bonding with each other, finding their communities within TikTok. There's golf TikTok and knitting TikTok and pirate TikTok, and like people can find other people like them and create these trends and share these memes. And from a mental health perspective, we know that that's been very helpful, and that I hear that a lot of the time, all the time from users, like how helpful that's been for them if they are stuck in a condo in downtown Toronto and don't have a backyard and can't really get out. Like it's an escape for them. And the thing that I love about TikTok is I'll spend a few 15 minutes or so on it, and you're smiling after. You're not you don't feel bad, you're not stressed out reading horrible news. Like for the most part, it's happy, entertaining, fun content to consume.
Can you see, this may be an overly large question too, but you remember one of the first early socially, what's the word I'm looking for? But anyway, when Google first started realizing that it could spot disease, for example, when people were plugging in symptoms into the search engine, you know what I'm talking about, right? That Google Trends actually had a public health purpose. Can you see, does TikTok, can you see trends emerge on TikTok that we should be watching for? Like, is there, during a pandemic, for example, if the public mood is growing to frustration or anger, would that show up as a TikTok thing, or would it be more, I know that's asking to, yeah.
It's an interesting question. Honestly, I don't know from a metric standpoint, but if something blows up on TikTok, something blows up on TikTok, right? If people start hashtagging videos and stitching and duetting and reposting their own videos, like that's going to get big and people will be talking about it. So, and as I said before, we welcome like robust, diverse debate, and there's a plethora of different viewpoints. In terms of kind of I think one of the, utilities for TikTok that we've seen over the last 8-10 months, I don't know, and tried to stop keeping track of how long this has been going on. But you hear about it a lot in the news where there's, commentary saying, well, young people, Gen Z, millennials, et cetera, are not watching premiers and prime ministers and mayors press conferences, and they're not hearing those public health messages. So one trend that is amazing that I love, and we're doing our best to help it out, is how can TikTok be leveraged to reach younger people with these public health messages, because if they're spending their time and that's where they're consuming media, we have to meet them where they are. And so we've seen there's some great doctors and public health agencies across Canada that have created their own organic content that has gone viral, and it's actually great public health messaging. We've also seen Toronto Mayor John Tory made an account and is even dancing a little, but getting the message out, and he's getting hundreds of thousands of views. And I think that's really important. And so that's something that we're very encouraged by. The Arkells did a video as well that was great. So the more that we see of those, I think that's going to be really helpful in making sure everyone's educated.
Laura, some of your comments, and including the ones you sent before the panel, have made me think that it raises the question, and you see it being asked in sort of the more regular mainstream media commentary: is the internet the democratic space that it was supposed to be? Again, I know that's a large question, but and especially for somebody from open media, but did it turn into the democratic place that it was originally envisioned? or is it, and Heather, I wouldn't mind hearing from you on this too, is how democratic is the internet right now?
Susan's just throwing the big questions out left, right, and center, just throwing them all at us. The short answer is no, it's not. There are real power imbalances. And I think in a lot of ways, the internet has given the feeling of leveling the playing field, because you can connect with people you might not have been able to connect with previously. And, once you have access, you have access. And we're very fortunate in Canada to have a very open internet to be able to access without, extensive filtering and censorship navigating our experience. But there is a huge disparity between what it looks like for different people in Canada to use and experience the internet. And that comes from a whole bunch of factors, access being the biggest barrier. You do or don't have access, that's your starting point. But even for those who do have access, affordability is a barrier. And so you might not have sufficient access for what you want to do. And so we see that for, in particular, students, where we've seen one kid in a family gets to go to school every day because they can't stream 2 kids' classrooms at the same time, even if they have enough devices, right? And so if you take someone who doesn't have internet access and then you compare that to someone whose entire life is online, there's a big power imbalance between what you're able to do in our culture and our society, the voice that you're given, how you're able to have that voice heard and amplified, that I think is really different from what we imagined, which was, if you have, a phone line, and everyone has a phone line, you can all connect to the internet and look how great it is. And I think there's that access and educational usage barrier. And then you layer on top of that, the very deep power dynamics of someone who is not comfortable using their real name on Facebook because, maybe, excuse me, they are transgender, but they don't want to come out to their family in that case. And so that's not comfortable for them. Or, that's something that's very private, but they don't want being made public. And all of a sudden, the real names policy means they can't exist on Facebook. Well, that's a big barrier for their ability to exist equally because of how big of a platform that is. And so I think it's the idea that, even in Canada, we can largely express ourselves on the internet, say what we want. If you don't have access to those platforms sufficiently, there are real gaps there. And I think, one of the things that often gets overlooked in internet policy when we talk about it, and in particular on content moderation, is like, there are a lot of technological solutions being proposed to try and fix human behavior. And at the heart of this, we're all still people online. And if you think that somehow technology is going to fix the deep structural power imbalances that we have in our society, I would strongly disagree with you on that one. I think that's a little too optimistic. And so if you take all of the power imbalances we have in society and you amplify those by virtue of who has access, who has what access, and when and how, I think that unfortunately there are a lot of democratizing elements. I still think there's a lot of good in it. I'm not here to knock the internet. Obviously, I think there's a lot of value in it. I think it's worth fighting for, and a lot of good that does already exist. But I think there's a long way to go in having it be that true level playing field that we might have hoped it was in the beginning.
I hope this doesn't fall in the thing, but if you could wave a magic wand right now and do one thing to make it more democratic, what would that be? Or you could take 3 if you want.
Can I think about that while Heather or
Yeah.
Steve weigh in for a second?
Heather, why don't you is the internet the democratic place we thought it would be?
I would say absolutely not. And I'm going to take a side bar approach to this. Women represent 50.5% of the population. The way you get traction on the internet is through algorithms that have been primarily created by men ages 20 to 35 in Silicon Valley. They were designed by men. They respond to the impulses of their own demographic because we see the world from our own prism. So to go back to some of the data journalism that Maria Reza did at Rappler, what they discovered when they went back and found these networks was that it only took 25 people. And again, with the democracy, you can be anonymous, and that's part of the problem. So 25 people who are bots they follow each other, they like each other, they retweet each other. They can generate 6 million messages by doing that in a very short period of time, because that network of 25 people gets the algorithm going. And once you get off on that, it's like getting on a rocket ship and you catapult. We saw it again with Bannon last week. He only has 175,000 followers on Facebook, but his network supported his beheading comments. And all of a sudden you got millions of people listening to his comments. So going back to the question about democracy, you know, in a democracy, everybody has a voice. On the internet, people have learned how to game it. And that voice is dictated by people who have outsized influence with their ability to take advantage of the algorithms. And there's nothing putting a check and balance on that yet. So I think we have to fix it at the human level and figure out how we're getting the message out. Because really, I think any breakdown in society, especially in ours, where there's increasing polarity and increasing inequity, any breakdown is through a lack of communication. So we're seeing particular groups, special interest groups, holding these platforms hostage with their message. But the simple fact is, everybody in a democracy should have a voice. And if you have a message, it's what is your message and how do you get it to people? And it's the how do you get it to people that is being hijacked by algorithms that do not reflect the full inclusion and diversity of our society in a democracy.
It's a great comment here from Carol and Jack to all the panelists saying, if we're all still people while online, should the internet sound more like my living room or people shouting at each other on the street? Sometimes my living room sounds like people shouting on the street. Back in the olden days, it did. Steve, you want to just take that one just for a...
I'll chime in on the question that everyone answered previously. I mean, in terms of, you know, being that democratic ideal, and I was a big dork in my early days, so I remember the early days of the internet pretty well, and before that BBSs. But so it's near and dear to my heart. But I'll speak in the TikTok capacity about you know, being a platform, being a content platform. And I think for us, what's most important and what we're absolutely committed to is being that industry leader in transparency and accountability, so that users can understand, you know, how the algorithm works, how our content moderation works, what is allowed and what isn't. And going back to what Laura said, you know, having that choice, which we think is really important. You know, on algorithms in particular, you know, that's part of the Transparency Center that I talked about at the opening of the call. You know, being very transparent about how that source code works and how we make those decisions. And we're asked those questions a lot about what content is shown to users and why, and, you know, also how do we avoid things like filter bubbles, which are super important, particularly in an algorithmic driven platform, how you can ensure that you're not just bringing people down a rabbit hole and you're showing them different content that may, you know, a variety of diverse content, particularly it will have different viewpoints. So that's something we're constantly working on. As I've said several times, like, it's never a mission accomplished moment, but we keep striving to be that absolute leader in transparency and accountability, because we know we need to earn the trust of our users.
Laura, believing she's escaped the question, is
I'll answer it. That's okay. So to the first question about should it look like your living room or the street, it should look like both, and you should have the choice to retreat to your living room and have living room conversations, and you should have the chance to go out and yell in the street. And I think right now it looks a little bit too much like one and not the other, or you don't have the choice of where you are when. So I would say you should get to do both. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm glad it was a good answer. To the magic wand, I think kind of building on Heather's point of representation, I'm gonna step back from the content moderation itself and say, like, if I could wave one magic wand, I would give every single person equal affordable access to the internet. I would say free, because I have a magic wand. So everyone gets equal, free, high-speed access to the internet that doesn't put urban centers faster than the technically connected rural areas, but like everyone gets magical high-speed internet. Because I think when we look at the amount of the disproportionate effect of not being connected, the people that are in that category are already more marginalized. And so to Heather's point of who's making not just the algorithms, but the platforms, the companies, the content, there's a disparity there. And Steve's highlighting some of the amazing Indigenous content on TikTok. Well, what would happen if you brought all of Canada's Indigenous communities online and let them manage their own connectivity and manage their own content and start their own platforms where they're not reliant on someone in Silicon Valley to do it, but they actually could tackle it themselves. So I think leveling that playing field right up front to empower those marginalized communities to do things for themselves and not be reliant on things that have been built for them by people that don't represent them, I think would be a really cool starting point. But I'm definitely going for the I want 3 wishes category, and I will come back to those other 2 later.
We're coming close to the end, and I see that there is a question from the Internet Society itself to all panelists. So I'm going to ask that for a quick run around on this, and then I'm going to ask you to just make some closing remarks. This is sort of an existential question. What would the internet look like without algorithms, and why are algorithms required? Why don't we start with Steve, because you said you've been there since the internet was born.
That was the first thought that jumped in my head. It would be like, the original days of Yahoo, when it wasn't a search, it was a directory, and you had to kind of click through and find what you want to do. And I think, again, there's choice here, and I think it's really important that consumers and users are able to choose what they, whether they're going to be in the living room or the street, to use your example. And if they are using a service that uses algorithms, that they're able to find out, what type of information is being used and how that's being used to determine what they see. We think that's super important. And as I said before, that's something we're continuing to strive to be transparent about. But, I think the positive side in how we use them at TikTok is if they're, I love cooking TikToks. And so I get a lot of food content because, it learns that you like that and it will show you more of that. But as I said, we're always throwing other things in there. And so, it is a personalized experience. When you're watching Netflix and it says, hey, you would probably like this series or show because you've liked this. I think that those are all things that there's a lot of value to and that I think has helped develop a lot of the services that users love.
Heather, you want to take a run at that one?
Well, I think if it's a philosophical question, it takes me back to maybe not philosophy as much as Psychology 101 in university with the ant study that discovered that 20% of the ant colony does 80% of the work. And when you remove that productive 20%, yeah. So that tells us, and I think humans are similar, we're inherently lazy and we like push notifications. So the algorithms kind of do a lot of the work for you. And I guess it comes back to, what your interests are. Personally, I love tricking the algorithms. Netflix has yet to recommend a show to me that I have any remote interest in watching. I get tweets from people I'm a lifelong debater. I launched the first public debating society in Ottawa. It's the only one still. And so I always take an oppositional point of view. I find that I learn more. So that affirmation bias that is baked in with the push notifications to give you what they think you want is a noble service. But again, it does create that kind of a deeper and deeper rabbit hole. And I think that when you see that Cheshire cat grinning, you have to question, is this the way to go? But I also don't like being critical without a solution. And I'm afraid I'm just not knowledgeable enough and worldly enough to have a solution to this. So easy to be the critic and hard to be the creator. But I do believe we need to live in hope. And there's going to be a way that algorithms start curating things in a way that provides a better service to people who, want to just go about living their lives and do the things that we all want to do. Safety, security, being close to our family and community.
Laura, I'm going to ask you to take on the algorithms and then put away your magic wand and just tell us what you would say is sort of a summary kind of or a closing statement in this session. I know we've been to the end of the internet and back, but
it's been an hour in 2020, so I think I've aged a decade over the course of this call. I think actually to Sally's question, like it kind of does loop back to what we were talking about in the beginning in terms of who's responsible for what. And I think we've talked about what's illegal, what's appropriate, what power the users have. And when we look at algorithms, I don't have enough choice right now in what the algorithms are displaying to me. So, you know, if I go to Google and look something up and I want Google search results, I want them to find something that is local and convenient to me, or I want them to find, you know, the highest rated answer as opposed to just the one that typed in the same word enough times that it looks like it comes up first, when we remember old Google hacks and how people were trying to game the algorithms. So there's a lot of things I want there, but I don't know how to change them. I don't know how to control them. I don't know how to say, actually, I'm looking up things in this other place that I'm not in right now. So stop giving me things based on location. When I'm looking at content being served to me, I don't know how to go in and say, actually, I just want to see things that are in Canada, or I don't know how to say, I actually only want to see conservative viewpoints or progressive viewpoints, or there's no ability to control that, but you know that it's happening behind the scenes. And so I think, what would have happened if you just didn't have them? I think it would look a little chaotic and anarchic and messy. But I think in terms of what it should look like, I think we really need to look at the transparency, to what Steve's saying, but also empowering users to take back a little bit of that control, to say, I don't want you to tell me what you think I want, Netflix. I just want to go through and see, like, by category, by year, every single thing you have alphabetically, or the ability to say, you know, I'm looking for this really specific thing. Stop trying to show me what you think I want. And that's for social media content, that's for cultural content, that's for search results. I think across the board, there's not enough power in our hands as users to use those algorithms to our own advantage, to turn them on, to turn them off, to tweak them for what we actually want, or in Heather's case, maybe to tweak them to stop giving you anything you want and totally mess with them. So either way.
And again, I think we've got to go just a couple of minutes to go through everybody, but what do you want people to take away from what we've been talking about today?
I mean, I'll give one thing, and then I'll this is maybe not the only takeaway, but one of the ones we haven't quite touched on, which is, I think when we talk about free expression a lot, when we talk about censorship, content moderation, we tend to think about the fact that there's types of contents we don't like. And so if we impose content moderation, that content will go away. And I think what we fail to recognize is that historically, when we've implemented censorship mechanisms in any form, they tend to continue to serve those in power. And they tend to silence those who are the most marginalized. And so I think in any solutions being put forward, we really need to be mindful of how are we using anything being considered to uplift those voices that need to be highlighted a bit more, that are at risk of being marginalized, as opposed to assuming that, you know, they will silence the voices that we find most offensive, because those who are making those decisions are not in our heads. They don't necessarily have our exact viewpoints, and there's a wide variety of voices out there we need to protect. So that would be my final contribution, I guess.
Thank you. No, it's great. Heather, what would you like to leave us with?
Well, there's this fabulous philosopher in Ottawa called Don Lenihan, and he wrote recently about the principle of tolerance. And the principle of tolerance came out of a very bloody period with the Protestants and Catholics, of violence and all that stuff. I think this is just human nature, where the pendulum swings, and we had a new form of technology that did not have curation, and everybody's out there shouting and screaming, and people are going to start creating their communities to bring it back in, to Laura's point, to Steve's point, where you understand, like, it's not just a democracy, it's a capitalist society, and a lot of this is driven by money. So if you boycott things, there's power in that. There's power in community. We're going to find a way to kind of curate things and become our own little community publishers. And then I think we're going to go into that period of tolerance, where we encourage debate and accept other people's opinions and don't react so vociferously to them. And that principle of tolerance will help us figure out how to move forward with communication on the internet.
Thank you. Steve, a closing line or two from you, because we are a TikTok away here.
That's why it's short form content on TikTok, like 15 seconds. You get it in, but I'll make
I would die there.
the next panel. I think I've said it enough time, but we are just our commitment to being an industry leader in transparency and accountability, and our belief that our industry does need to be held to an exceptionally high standard by government, by the public, and that we all need to live up to that. And so we're doing everything we can there, and we're going to continue working to improve to earn and keep the trust of our users.
Thank you to all of you. That was fabulous. It was very nice to get a chance. It felt a little bit like sending my brain to the spa. But thank you very much, all of you. And have a nice weekend.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you to Steve, Laura, Heather. What an awesome discussion. I'm going to pat myself on the back for picking such awesome speakers and moderators to come have this discussion. But thank you so much. So I'd now like to introduce the next panel of the day, an equitable education in a digital world. I'm going to jump right in and introduce the moderator of that discussion, Joel Templeman, who is the education specialist at Tech Manitoba. Joel, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Absolutely, thank you. You can hear it, thumbs up, we can. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Joel Templeman and I am an educational specialist at Tech Manitoba. I am delighted to be your host this afternoon. Thank you to the Internet Society Canada chapter for providing us with this opportunity to discuss these pressing and critical issues. Tech Manitoba represents Manitoba's growing tech sector. We are an industry-led association that helps companies thrive and grow through collaboration, education, and promotion. If you're interested in becoming more involved in technology, we host events and discussions on a regular basis, and it'd be a great opportunity to network and learn from professionals in the field. To stay up to date, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, and Paul is going to drop that in the chat. ICTC, they are a nonprofit national center of expertise for the digital economy. ICTC is a trusted source for evidence-based policy advice, forward-looking research, and creative capacity building programs for the digital economy. In July 2020, Tech Manitoba enlisted the expertise of ICTC and the Brandon University to assist us in conducting research for the current state of digital literacy with a focus on inadequate and inequitable access to internet connectivity, and specifically its effects on education and learning in Manitoba. This project was conducted in 2 phases, where phase 1 was undertaken by ICTC, and it is the subject of our discussion panel today. Phase 2, which is currently underway with Brandon University, will be primary research guided by the findings of phase 1. The final report is expected in a few weeks, so this will give us an opportunity for an overview of some of the findings, and we are fortunate enough today to have the gentleman who is helping to make this all happen. I would like to welcome Nathan Snyder, the Manager of Research and Stakeholder Engagement for ICTC. Nathan has taught in the School of Business and Management at Canadore College, as well as Cambrian College. He's on the board of directors of the Near North Mobile Media Lab, co-founder of CoDesign. Nathan's previous research was focused on the social and economic barriers of the ICTC field facing Indigenous communities in Canada, as well as the tech equity issues as they're related to broadband connectivity and low income families. Nathan will kick us off with a quick overview of the research, and then we have a packed panel ready to discuss and debate how these issues are impacting parents, children, and learning of all sorts across Canada. What do policy and decision makers need to hear and understand? Nathan, over to you.
Can everyone hear me okay right now? Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'm using new earbuds, so I was worried about tech issues. I'm just going to do a bit of screen sharing, but I just want to start by saying thank you for the very nice introduction, Joel. I appreciate that greatly. So if everyone here bears with me for a minute, I will kick things off. So what I wanted to do is provide a bit of an opportunity. Can I get a thumbs up if everyone can see the screen properly? Yeah, excellent. So what I wanted to do is kind of kick things off as a bit of a context bookend framework for today's conversation by really highlighting some of the research that Joel just mentioned that we're engaged in. So ICTC is a national center of expertise as it relates to Canada's digital economy, but we had the pleasure of really diving into the issue of digital equity and sort of what that looks like. And for those of you that are joining us right now, that had the opportunity of actually participating in the previous conversation, you'll notice that there's a bit of an ongoing narrative here surrounding quality internet access, connectivity, and the various ways that that implicates the Canadian experience as we know it. One of the things that I thought was really interesting that Laura brought up in the previous panel is this concept of power distribution issues as it relates to connectivity, and that being like a new way of sort of understanding this kind of issue. So as I go through this material, I'm going to blow through it. There's quite a bit, as Joel mentioned, that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. This is really just a primer for today's conversation. So I encourage you to ask questions if this does prompt anything, but really it's just kind of laying the framework. But I'd like to keep that idea in mind. So this is really now turning into a conversation about power distribution issues as it relates to equity. So there we go. So just as Joel mentioned, sort of the idea here behind why the research was being conducted in the first place was to really gain clarity on the relationship between broadband infrastructure as it relates to education and tech equity, in hopes of providing or aiding in the development of provincial strategies across Manitoba. In addition to that, this is a bit of an environmental scan. So all the research that will be displayed in this report is environmental scan secondary lit analysis. But our aim or our goal is to help identify the information needed to actually help shape informed, evidence-based public policy. And that's what we were dedicated to doing. I just wanted to add to that concept of the bookend of power distribution, power struggle issues, and kind of frame based on what actually came out of the University of Texas at Austin, this concept of digital equity and what it means. A lot of people often use it, very few maybe could define it in a bit of an elevator pitch, but I wanted to start today's conversation by doing that. So digital equity has primarily 5 key dimensions associated to it, and one of them is access to hardware, software, and connectivity in the internet. So that is literally the foundational element of digital equity.
Nathan, can you pop that into presentation mode? It's a little small.
Yeah, absolutely. I believed it was in presentation mode.
You may just not be sharing the right part. Sorry.
Is it frozen by chance? Does it say broadband access digital equity?
Yes, but we see both panels.
Oh, interesting. All right, just bear with me here and I'll try to address that. There, let me know if that helps address the issue.
Yes, we're all good. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So it has 5 different key dimensions. One of them, the foundational element being connectivity, software and hardware. The second being meaningful, high quality, culturally relevant content in local languages. So really interesting if we take into consideration, obviously, Canada's Indigenous population, which obviously has a very strong presence within Manitoba, and is kind of a foundational marker for any of the research that we plan on conducting or continue to plan on conducting across the province. Creating, sharing, and exchanging digital content, access to educators who know how to use digital tools and resources, which is really interesting when you think about digital equity and the concept of having education sort of play into this, and everyone that's on today's panel. And then lastly, high quality research, which is the foundational kind of piece to any community development initiative, whether it be helping shape public policy or potentially the development of new NGOs that are dedicated to help kind of bridge this digital divide. So education, connectivity, and COVID-19, I wanted to kind of highlight, obviously, the pandemic and kind of one of the central themes of the previous conversation that we just overheard in the previous panel. But COVID-19's impacted, obviously, in a variety of different ways and necessitated the immediate and widespread adoption of online or distance learning technologies, which for a lot of communities, a lot of homes, kind of further exacerbated issues that were already prevalent long before COVID-19 ended up negatively influencing a lot of communities. It makes the idea of engaging even in the educational process as a student, potentially a family member, maybe even a mature learner, to even engage with that educational process. And in recent ICTC research, in a previous EdTech report, issues of economic inequality were highlighted by several respondents through a key informed interview process that we conducted nationally. So to say that this is an isolated incident here in Manitoba, that is simply just not the case. And as the previous speakers highlighted, this is a widespread issue. Connectivity challenges negatively influence the student learning experience right across the board. And these issues were cited by also negatively impacting the educator's experience. If connectivity doesn't simply have a foundational kind of component to the modern educational process, teaching experience, well, the reality is we can't have expectations of educators to simply know how to adopt and apply these new technologies as they continue to expand. We have to sort of reshape what this means to us, what the expectations that we have of ourselves, of our country, of broadband infrastructure, the teaching experience, and even the learning experience. We need to kind of flip the traditional narrative on its head. And again, COVID-19 has sort of exacerbated pre-existing negative issues. So I've highlighted here a couple of interesting kind of case notes, but I just want to be respectful of time. There were a few digital trends in the classroom that were taking place, like I mentioned previously. And one of them that I wanted to particularly highlight is the 75% of teachers are assigning homework that requires the internet. As we can begin to understand, obviously COVID-19's influence in this is very high. And we can infer that in a lot of instances, especially right now, for those that are paying attention to the Canadian COVID experience, with the second wave well underway and in full swing, the reason why there's an assignment for a high volume of digital work or homework is simply a byproduct of our current experience. So this is a trend that was continuing long before COVID, but is now clearly, especially with the second wave, making its presence known. And with that, all of the relative issues of connectivity in just trying to participate in the student experience. And many of these teachers now have to find a way to sort of achieve the same learning outcomes dealing with connectivity issues. And this is where it's specific to Manitoba, while also dealing with the fact that a lot of these communities, a lot of their students might not have the equipment at home, might not have the internet connectivity at home, the availability, might have various siblings, parents that are now working in remote working environments. All of these are contributing factors to a detrimental learning experience. This is something I did want to take a moment to reflect on, and I hope this is a primer for everybody else today in the panel. A lack of digital access is a lack of access to education, period. If I haven't done a good enough job sort of highlighting the key takeaway of what we all should be learning from today's session, it is simply this. A lack of digital access means a lack of access to education. And I think there couldn't be a more succinct way of putting it. So obviously COVID-19 accelerated connectivity solutions. So I didn't want to make this completely negative. I did want to highlight that both locally, globally, Manitoban experience, as well as internationally, like I mentioned, there's a lot of really creative solutions and ways communities have begun to sort of address this emergency situation that we keep finding ourselves in as it relates to trying to connect digitally for educational purposes. So I've highlighted a few here. One of them that isn't actually noted here that I thought was really interesting about the really far northern Canadian experience. It took place in the Yukon, where the schools actually became the designated areas or hotspots or hubs for connectivity. And during the emergency transition earlier in the spring of 2020, what ended up taking place is these actually became Wi-Fi hotspots for students to actually go with their families, if possible, with their mobile devices, park instead of cars, and actually get the connectivity from the school that was being broadcasted publicly, just as an emergency way to participate in the learning experience. And if we think about these types of creative solutions, I don't want us to think that if we're shaping public policy and the public narrative here, that's the only way to go about trying to address these issues. If anything, the panelists today are going to be talking about really creative solutions that they've identified. In fact, Rob, who's one of our panelists today, has a great global, nationwide sort of experience as it relates to this. And I hope we can explore that a little bit further. The Canadian standard. So the only thing that I wanted to really highlight on this was the recent announcement by the federal government about $1.75 billion investment to try to connect 98% of Canadians to high speed by 2026. This is really interesting because those in the internet connectivity cycles, including obviously members of the Internet Society, this is a very admirable goal. I think a lot of the feedback that I was reading said, well, we've heard a similar narrative previous to COVID-19 about trying to increase connectivity opportunities. We're not quite there yet. 2026 is actually a few years off and may present a variety of problems, especially if solutions aren't found a little bit sooner. And then
Speaking of
two individuals.
connectivity, you cut out there for a second there, Nathan.
Yeah.
Hey, Nathan, I think we can see you now. Can you hear us?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry,
Okay.
It's funny, kind of ironic that connectivity issues are plaguing this presentation.
I thought you did that on purpose.
No, that would have been good. I'm not that clever, but thank you for pointing it out, kid. I appreciate it.
You're all good. You're all back on and live, ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you. So the one thing that I just wanted to mention is that Manitoba, according to our research, Manitoba is actually the second lowest broadband download speeds in all of Canada, second only to the Yukon. And I've actually included some of the broadband speeds here. These are averages, and this is dictated by some of the data from the CRTC, which was highlighted by the CBC a short time ago in 2016. In addition to that, one of the things I should note, because it's a bit of a negative, obviously, is that the average price range for broadband is much higher in rural communities. So if we're thinking about equity and we're thinking about connectivity issues being poor in the north, and if we're thinking about the fact that even though it's poorer in the north, you're also stuck funding to a much higher degree, even the ability to have poor internet, nothing exacerbates the digital divide further than that, as far as I'm concerned. So there's one case study. There's a community specifically in Supai, Arizona, an indigenous community located there that had a really kind of creative solution to address broadband connectivity challenges within their very specific, very challenging geographic region. And that was to essentially create a centralized hotspot so that they were able to provide for a variety of purposes, educational being one of them, healthcare being another, the opportunity to connect digitally to be able to increase sort of the quality of life for a lot of the Indigenous community members in this area. And I think it's important to kind of reflect on the fact that this was a creative solution provided by an Indigenous community in the US, but many examples exist specifically here. And there's members again on our panel that can kind of elaborate that on that further. But it's interesting to know and to keep in mind that, again, this isn't just necessarily a Canadian challenge, an Indigenous challenge, but this is impacting communities abroad as well. There are applications and very easy kind of connections to the Manitoban experience as well that I've highlighted here. But really, not to kind of read off slides, I just want to encourage everyone that once this report comes out, it's really interesting that regardless of whether or not you live in Manitoba, a lot of the challenges and a lot of the things that we actually highlight as part of this report have a variety of other transferable applications in other provinces, very similar narratives that you're going to see and identify that kind of highlight these challenges that, again, might not necessarily need public policy to help shape long-term solutions, might actually require boots on the ground action. So I'm just going to conclude there and pass things back over to Joel, but I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to help shape some of that information for you and share it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan. That was excellent. Obviously, for the sake of time, you'll need to read the report for the full thing. There's it was definitely an interesting process to be putting it together, and ever changing, since daily things are changing for good and bad because of COVID.
Absolutely.
So it's been quite a journey. So we have many panelists today, and I'm only going to briefly introduce each of them. We are going to put a link to their bios in the chat, just in case you want to see the full bios. But I'd like to get to the conversation and see what our experts have to say. So the first, Kirsten Thompson, who serves as the Divisional Coordinator for ICT for Mountain View School Division in Manitoba. She's a Microsoft educator trainer, as well as a Google certified educator. She has a master's of education and a focus of curriculum and pedagogy, with a focus on implementation of technology to expand curricular objectives, specifically in remote and rural classrooms. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But Kristen, a question for you. You work directly with teachers, parents, students in a rural community. If you had one message for the policy and the decision makers across the country when it comes to online learning, what would you tell them and urge them to consider? Kristen.
Thanks, Joel. Well, I actually prefer the term remote or distance learning over online learning, as we have to recognize that online programming is just not accessible for a significant number of Manitoban and Canadian learners. Right now, current mandates from provincial leaders outline very specific details for school divisions, and they're designed to ensure a consistent delivery for online programming. But right now, they haven't accounted for the inconsistent home environment. So they haven't even ensured that these standards are possible for families, not to mention sustainable. So my primary concern is that digital inequity is going to lead to a widening of the gap between Manitoba students. And right now, our current situation is establishing a very dangerous precedent where we're seeing Manitoba families pay
Just breaking up a
You're
little
just
bit
breaking
there.
up.
in order to access their public education.
So it would last the last 30 seconds we lost there.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out that my primary concern would be that digital inequity is going to lead to a widening of the gap between our Manitoba students, and that our current situation is establishing a very dangerous precedent where we're seeing Manitoba families having to pay for high-speed internet in order to have access to public education.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll definitely be coming back. But Wayne Kelly is the project coordinator for the Rural Development Institute. Wayne is in the last stages of his PhD, the focus on rural communities to build digital skills for local youth. He helps lead the Rural Policy Learning Commons project and focusing on increasing rural and northern policy impact, capacity, and knowledge exchange in Canada and internationally. Wayne, you, with your background in research, is focused more on the economic development of rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. How important is education in that role?
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me here. And I'm going to actually sort of diverge from sort of a lot of the conversation here in terms around connectivity. I absolutely agree that connectivity is essential. We need to get our communities, our schools, our students, our businesses, our rural residents, our northern residents, our Indigenous residents, everybody connected. But I would actually argue that the digital skills and building digital capacity is even more important than connectivity. And why I say that is actually connectivity is just the first step in actually realizing the benefits of digital technologies. You need to know how to use those technologies, and then you actually need to build a culture of use so that people are using those technologies. And I think for economic development, building that those digital skills, that digital culture is key. An example, I focus more on rural communities, community development, economic development. And for rural communities, Indigenous communities, remote communities, communities that are sort of suffering from that digital divide, I'd ask how many of those businesses in those communities are actually have a solid online presence. And especially right now, I mean, Manitoba's on lockdown right now. So if I was in a small community and I wanted to shop locally, many of the local businesses aren't online. And so it makes it really difficult to actually participate in that digital economy, and those businesses, those community members are sort of falling behind even further. The other thing I think that's really, really key is that the pace of change with technology, the pace of change with how we're using digital technologies. So rural communities, in terms of from an economic perspective, rural communities need to catch up to where we're at now, and also then be looking forward. And so digital technologies and skills need to keep up in rural areas. World Economic Forum just released a report. They're speculating that in 5 years, 50% of us are going to have to reskill. So if you have rural communities and it's youth, it's decision makers, it's businesses, it's people that are employed in rural areas, if they're already behind sort of where the current trends are in sort of digital technology use, not only do they need to catch up to today, but we know that in 5 years, they're going to have to reskill again. We're all going to have to reskill again. And so the connectivity in the ground is so important, but it's only that first step. And it really is how we're building that capacity and that culture to use that technology that's really going to impact our rural, our northern, our remote, and our Indigenous communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Wayne. Dr. Rob McMahon is an associate professor in the Media and Technology Studies unit of the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Arts at the University of Alberta. Rob's research focus is on the development, adoption, and use of broadband and internet technologies by rural, remote, northern, and Indigenous communities. Rob also co-founded the First Mile Connectivity Consortium and is the co-director of the Digital NWT project, which aims to strengthen the foundation of the community-based digital literacy in the Northwest Territories. Rob, your research and work have brought you face-to-face with these issues across Canada. How does Manitoba's experience compare to others? And what do policy and decision makers need to know to take this rare moment where there is focus and money available to deploy it well?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joel. And it was great to hear everybody's presentation. And I just wanted to point to what Nathan was talking about and Laura from Open Media, that digital equity piece is so key to this. So it was really great to see that. So I would say in terms of that aspect, we are seeing that across Canada in lots of rural and northern regions. I also wanted to highlight, I really liked how Nathan bounced off like the challenges with the innovations. And I would say that's also what we're seeing in other areas. So I can speak to in the Northwest Territories, we've been running a campaign with Sierra with their internet performance test called #NWT Digital Divide. And we're finding that some people can't even take the test. Their connectivity is so slow. But in other cases within the Northwest Territories, it's really quite fast access. I'm pointing this out to really highlight a couple of things. One is, we are seeing digital disparities, digital divides within regions as well as, and even within communities. At the community level, we're finding some people get faster internet than others. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is, we've been running this campaign now for a couple of months and we're getting huge uptake and testing of people that is really bringing that data to light. So I just wanted to point that out that, at the community level, people are interested in tracking their access. They're monitoring both the lack of access and the success and longevity of projects. And this kind of leads into the second piece, what can decision makers, policymakers do? I would say look to the resources on the ground. These are the people that will help track the success of projects, especially publicly funded projects. They can be involved in monitoring their development and their long-term sustainability. Nathan highlighted, we'll hear from people like Ken Sanderson in terms of internet service providers that are operating in creative ways. A lot of times, we hear about the lack of a business case in these quite small communities, but nonprofits are there to fill those, gaps, provide these creative solutions. So there's lots of fascinating work going on across Canada there. And kind of tied into that, I think as we look to solve these challenges around access, think about, we talk a lot about online education, online businesses that are getting developed through access to connectivity, but of course, looking at that underlying infrastructure, that in and of itself is an economic development resource. Communities can lease that to other groups in order to provide a revenue stream. They can hire local technicians. Wayne talked a lot about the digital literacy piece. A component of that could be operating, building, managing networks and infrastructure. So let's look to those kind of solutions too. I think there's a lot of people up in the north and other areas interested in that type of work. So thanks for having me on the panel. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, there's a ton of really good projects going on, people working in this, but not everybody gets to see them or know what's going on. So some visibility and some coordination would bring a lot of value to the table. Next, we have Adrienne Defonso Veneziano, who is a learning development specialist at Compugen Inc. She is an Ontario certified teacher with experience in special education and a demonstrated history of working in both the primary and secondary educational system. She is a Microsoft Innovative Educator and a Microsoft Master Trainer, having trained over 1,650 educators in 2020, most of them since COVID, on the use of Microsoft Learning tools and applications for the classroom and beyond. Adrian, you have been supporting classroom teachers with educational technology all over the country, engaging teachers from urban and rural communities, rich and poor demographics. Where are the teachers when it comes to operating in this new online world, especially since COVID-19 has so vastly changed their willingness and need to use these tools?
Thank you, Joel, for having me here, and thank you for that informative conversation we've had so far. So there is no program that could have prepared educators to teach in a pandemic. And I think one of the things that resonates with me is something that was once said by Winston Churchill, which was never waste a good crisis. And so that being said, I think in terms of teachers and where they are and how they embrace this, and what I've learned firsthand from working with teachers, is that it is no longer an option. It's a need to change the way teaching and learning is currently happening. And to put the connectivity aside for a moment, it's just understanding that there is a fundamental shift in terms of how we teach students, how we create personalized and student-centric experiences, engagements, satisfaction, and results for learners. All teachers, as I've noticed, are on a continuum depending on what their school district or division is employing to allow for this contact with students to happen. And I've met those teachers in their learning journey, depending on wherever they are. So in some instances, they have embraced a technology or a set of tools that has got them full up and running immediately or weeks after the pandemic has set, and some are still on that journey and learning. And I think it's a matter of embracing where they are, as we do as educators with our students, and learning to adopt to the change, but also realizing that we're adjusting constantly. We're adopting to a new normal, or some sort of extraordinary normal that will be in place, and being able to thrive in the future in what will be known as our new education system. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's so much going on, and everyone, I think, has gotten a new respect for and a new, more close connection with the education system. Anyone with kids who are at home doing this, I think that the classroom experience has more than ever kind of hit home. I think everyone either has or knows people who are going through this. So it's such a very trying but interesting time for teachers around the world, but especially across Canada. Ken Sanderson is a member of the Pineyamuntang First Nation and is currently Executive Director of Broadband Communications North Incorporated, a nonprofit internet service provider with network covering over 1,000 square kilometers. Ken, as the Executive Director of an Indigenously owned nonprofit ISP that has been working over many years to bring improved connectivity to Indigenous and rural communities across Manitoba, with your experience in things that have worked and things that have not, what would you advise policy and decision makers federally, provincially, locally to do to solve these long-standing issues? Ken.
There's a lot of things that can be done. I think, which one should I start with? I think to begin with, the decision makers need to understand the demographics. I'll put it that way, because what I'm about to say isn't really unique to Indigenous communities. I think when we talk about, I mean, it's pretty clear that connectivity, that there's the haves and the have-nots when it comes to connectivity and equity. That apparently that was the last panel discussion, covered it in a great detail. And a lot of the differences end up having to do with different types of demographics, whether it be the rural versus urban, whether it be along the lines of poverty, whether it be along the lines of Indigenous, non-Indigenous, etc. So the challenge is that we're trying to come up with solutions for groups and communities and people that are lacking that connectivity now. But I kind of feel that there's some misunderstanding about the groups are trying to solution for. And that leads to problems in and of itself. I can give an example for the Indigenous perspective. There seems to be a great deal of misunderstanding about how Indigenous community politics work, right? Like, I think it's important for decision makers to understand what do band council resolutions mean, right? What are the different layers of political engagement? There's the community level, where do tribal councils fit in on this? Where do political entities like Southern Chiefs Organization, MKO, AMC, where do they fit in to this mix, right? And when they put out resolutions, how do those resolutions fit into the mix in terms of legality and in terms of consent for communities, etc.? Where does duty to consult come in, right? What are the obligations of these funders around that? These are the kind of questions that I think a lot of our funders just don't seem to have adequate answers to, and it really impacts how funds roll out. So, for me, in terms of how BCN works, is we just operate on the principle that, it depends on the community. Each community has the sovereign will and choice to do what it is they want to do, right? I'm not going to go in there and say, well, no, you have to work with us. It's like, it doesn't work that way, right? They get to choose. So if a community says, you know what, Ken, thanks, but no thanks, we don't want BCN involved, we're going to work with ABC Incorporated over here. Hey, that's perfectly fine. That's their sovereign will and choice. If a community says, oh yeah, sure, we want you to work with us, great. That's the only way I'm going to do it, right? And I think that's part of the issues, is that, where our funders don't understand how to navigate some of these things. So that's a big one, I believe. The other big issue that we face is the highways, I'll call it that way, leading to these communities, the information highways. We take any community and use an actual physical highway for cars. There is not a single community that can have economic success if they have no highway leading to them, right? It's an absolute critical thing. But have you ever seen anywhere or any case where the government said, oh, you know what, community, you got to find a private company to build that road for you? Like, really? We don't do that. That becomes a public asset that's built. What you do with that public asset after, hey, now business can fairly compete over it. The information highway needs to be no different. I think the hands-off approach that government takes is wrong, because it really only perpetuates the political warfare that occurs. You dangle $1 billion. Oh my God, I guarantee you're going to see the sharks come out, and those sharks can come from anywhere. They can be just people with not the right intentions behind what they're trying to do, because everybody wants this money, like the pot at the end of the rainbow. And so you end up with a lot of conflict, right? Like who should have access to that? Like you have I've seen cases also where, you've got small companies that have invested in infrastructure into a community. I know that happened to us as well, but even not us, but even others in the industry have had the same scenario, where suddenly the feds come along and give money to a competitor who's not even in that community, and suddenly rendering all your investments useless, right? So these kind of things are major problems, both for industry, whether that's Indigenous owned or not, doesn't matter, and even for communities in terms of what they want to do with their broadband and how much they want to be involved. That's an issue. And I honestly think that, governments need to start looking at this and saying, you know what, we'll build the backbone infrastructure to the communities, and then it's just, anyone who wants to compete over it from that point to the last mile can fairly compete on it, just like you would with a highway. You build the highway, businesses are going to fairly compete over that highway, right? That's part of how I feel this needs to go. And I really think that the feds need to stop, because what's happening right now is they keep pumping millions into very large corporations who, you arguably don't necessarily need the funding help. And they're building these highways into the community, but now you've got privatized highways, right? And it becomes really difficult, if not impossible, for most communities if they want to start up their own ISPs, or if they want or whatever, right? Like it just means that's a whole world of economic activity that is completely cut off from them, in many cases without their consent. So those are some of the things that I would say, some big ones, that really need to be looked at. Understanding the groups and the communities that need the support, and understanding how they operate, and understanding their scenarios, but also looking at that backbone piece, saying, you know what, there's certain places where having a public asset makes sense. So I'll leave it at that, because there's so many things I could just go on, but.
That's perfect. Thank you, Ken. I mean, absolutely. This is the other thing I'd like to point out is, especially with everyone on the panel, everyone didn't just start working on this 6 months ago. This is effort that's been going on for a very long time. And I think we have a representation here of kind of all aspects of that digital literacy triangle. We have everything from the connectivity to the devices, to the learning to use, that adaptability, all that kind of stuff. And it takes all of this effort, right? Coordinated effort in it. One of the things about the Indigenous condition, if I say it that way, is that some people maybe aren't paying attention to it, or aren't tuning out of it, but the efforts that are going into place to get connectivity to a rural, like a rural municipality, or to an Indigenous community, neither live in a bubble. And sometimes we're treating things like bubbles. The school division or the district is got plans and operating in one corner, but they're not necessarily coordinating or talking to the rural municipality, and they're not necessarily making it easy for the neighboring Indigenous community. Right? Everyone's got their own sovereignty, and everyone's got their own plans and everything. But this is not something that you do without some kind of regional coordination and communication, right? So even understanding, like Ken said, just understanding the differences between the objectives and the way that things are done is a very important first step. So I think that's very important takeaway from everybody today. So I'm going to open it up just to a discussion with everyone. Basically, the question is, and again, with educational focus, we are going down a road, and I think COVID-19 is maybe exacerbating this experience that learners are having. And it seems to be that it's becoming even more so two or more very different experiences, the haves and the have-nots. Where are we at? What can we do? What's the next step?
If everyone's comfortable with it, I actually just wanted to jump in, because I think it's really interesting. We've seen every panelist right now speak very clearly from their own professional and lived experiences. We've had 2 different panelists discuss pedagogical and digital literacy shifts. We've talked about boots on the ground community level change. We've also taken a look from Ken's most recent example, taking a look at financial support, policy, government assistance. And it's kind of creating, as Joel just mentioned, a bit of a triangle between connectivity, learning, and community. And I think it's important because despite the fact that we've touched on a few different subjects throughout the course of this discussion already, it's interesting to note that I don't think that there's any foundational element of this conversation that comes before another. I think that the previous panel even highlighted it as well. It's an interconnected, interwoven issue that doesn't have a clear response, but instead of leaving it sort of vague, I think it's sort of apt that we understand that incremental progress amongst those 3 different elements of this triangle that I just outlined. I think that's where we're going to start to see success. And I think between the report, between the initiatives that individuals like Rob are leading, research that Wayne's engaged in at the community level, we're starting to see that shift, that forward progress, despite how incremental it may be. I think forward progress is obviously better than none whatsoever. The last thing I just wanted to say is kind of a segue back to what Wayne kicked things off with. Is this idea about connectivity and digital literacy specifically. So Wayne kind of boiled it down further. It's not just connectivity, it's digital literacy. I just want to I don't want to challenge that. I just want to sort of add to it that the democratization, I think, of education is a really interesting element that sort of throws a wrench in your philosophy there. Just because I think that if we're talking about economic competitiveness, digital literacy, digital connectivity, digital competitiveness, like all 4 of those different elements, I think that democratization of education is really important to consider here. And you probably obviously address that as well. But I think it links in a bit of the points from the two educators that we have on today's panel. It brings it all together, because I think that despite the fact we're talking brick and mortar, we're talking about hard infrastructure, we haven't touched on the concept of the democratization of education yet. So I just want to sort of leave it with you guys to discuss that. Maybe Wayne, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, no, and I think you're bang on, Nathan. We can't preclude connectivity with digital literacy, but they should be happening in parallel, right? Whether you have access to 5 megabits or 10 megabits or 50 megabits, you do have some connectivity. And just waiting for that whole field of dreams approach, as soon as I get my fiber to the community, everything's going to be perfect, doesn't work. In the education world, the question I keep asking in rural communities is, do you have somebody in your community that's supporting your junior high and your high school youth to look at online education opportunities after graduation? What are those post-secondary opportunities that you can do in your communities? I haven't come across the rural community that's doing that yet. And I think that's an example of a real opportunity if we focus on the digital literacy. Some of them are very bandwidth, some of the options are very bandwidth heavy, I know that, but some are, you can download the videos, you don't have to be live streaming, you can actually download them. So there are opportunities there. And I agree with you. I mean, we need to consider that, because that's another example of how rural youth right now are sort of forced to go to urban centers to take post-secondary education. And that's a whole nother conversation. But the digital element of that is really key. Now, you're right, within a rural community, there's a whole spectrum in of itself of people who have connectivity and the capacity to access that, sort of knowing where to look. So absolutely, we need to address across the board these issues.
Educational progress. Yeah, that's really good. Ken, just based on your experience, obviously being in communities, specifically in rural communities in northern Manitoba, I'm just curious, have you come across the issue of education? Like, has that been, obviously it's outside of your typical day-to-day, but no one would probably have a better kind of firsthand experience having been in communities to see what this looks like. Do you have any thoughts or feedback on that?
Well, it depends on where you're going, where you're looking. So we have communities in Manitoba, a lot of them actually, that still don't have all-weather road access. So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
We still have a number of communities that still aren't connected to the power grid. So they're running on diesel. So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
When you look at the current approach that the government takes to funding projects, it really creates, it really incentivizes private companies rather than community initiatives or nonprofits. A lot of the funds demand private equity or investment. How do you do that as a community initiative? How do you do that as a nonprofit, right? As a nonprofit, you're not even allowed to have a big capital fund saved up and waiting for these kind of opportunities, right? So it's a real problem. All of these funds, I mean, even just look at the last satellite CRTC fund. Where did like 90% of that fund go? To a Bell company, right? Like, come on, like it's 2020. Can't we be better than that yet? It's a big issue. And I think we need to start looking at it. I mean, this is free. There's free money that they're giving, but it's free money where it's slanted towards you needing to have equity into it. So like I say, it's tough for a nonprofit. We can't come up with, because they also the way they roll it out too is a challenge, because it rolls out as they're not funding you per se. You actually have to have all the money up front, and then you have to, put in your claims for reimbursement. But these are big issues, right? Like, again, it favors large entities that already have the capacity to do this.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue too, so that's just more sort of generally, we have communities right now that trying to look at a solution for them, fiber-backed solution, is not going to be easy. We're talking long stretches through muskeg, through wild territory without roads. How do you maintain that, right, operationally?
Yeah.
So, it's like that's a come I go back to, like, I mean, some of these communities, we need options that, like there are some places I think where government can play a good role. And that's why I like to use the highway analogy. To me, it's the thing that makes most sense. You try to get a solid fiber line into a place like Shamattawa, for example, in Manitoba. If it was a public asset, because it's there for the public good, you're not going to get rich delivering service to one little community, right? Because there's nothing after it, right? Once you get the fiber there, it's not like there's a gateway to, a dozen other communities after that. It's literally, you're just trenching like 200 kilometers of fiber to one community, right? Mm-hmm. And it's one community that, don't necessarily have, they don't have a whole lot of money kicking around. So like, you can't even, we'll just charge them double what we charge in the city to, pay for our operations. You can't even do that, right? Mm-hmm. Not going to happen. So, that's why I do think there are places where government plays a critical role. And I just don't think that they're doing it right now. I think that they're taking the easy way out, which is just throwing money all over the place. And it's just, we've seen it time and time again. You throw money at a problem without proper thought, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't achieve the results that we need. We need to actually work in partnership with the government, but like in a real way, and that's not happening yet.
There's a little bit of action in the Q&A in the chat. One of the questions is speaking to the knowledge drain happening, especially in Indigenous communities, which isn't just for Indigenous communities, but that people are leaving. Sometimes, and I think it was brought up earlier, if you have to leave for high school, post-secondary, are you going to come back? Are you going to consider settling in a place that doesn't have access to high speed? These types of issues.
Is there anyone in particular that's directed to?
No.
Well, I can speak not so much to people leaving community. I can maybe speak to some Indigenous examples of online high schools, for example, that I think just like all communities, right, there's lots of different approaches to these types of challenges, and also lots of innovation coming out. And I think this ties into some of that discussion around how do different organizations and institutions at the community level, how are we seeing them cooperate in order to address connectivity challenges and build out a sustainable, I'm going to call it an operational case rather than a business case, because as Ken put so well, it doesn't always have to be businesses, it can be nonprofits. But I'm just going to point to Northwest Ontario, KNET services. These are fly-in communities. They've been connected to the internet in some cases since 1994, right there at the very start. And they had an experiment that's now grown up into the Keewatnik Internet High School. And so what this is essentially an initiative led by the First Nations that people were having to leave their communities and go to the south to go to high school. And they said, hang on a second, can we use this connectivity in order to build out community level educational services? So if you imagine, kind of similar to what we're doing on Zoom here, at 12 o'clock, well, 12 o'clock I'd be at lunch, 1 o'clock I go to math, I beam into the math teacher, 2 o'clock I'm going to music, right? And then everybody beams in, because they don't have a high enough population to have teachers that are specialists in all the different subjects, right? So they developed this networked model, but I think what's important to point out is the bandwidth that model used then in turn was shared as a community resource across other areas, right? So they could build a sustainable operational case. They had a solid, you need bandwidth to deliver education, so they could have that predictable bandwidth level, and then that in turn supported the development of infrastructure. And it also created local jobs. You'd have people, on-site technicians to support the teachers and the students. So that's one example in education. I'm sure Ken and others are aware of other ones happening, but
I actually, if you wouldn't mind, Rob, I just want to kind of piggyback off of that. So I've actually had the honor of working with KNET in the past through my organization, the Information Communications Tech Council. And one of the things I just want to sort of elaborate on, and to get back to that kind of triangle that I was helping build earlier about connectivity, learning, and community, is that some of the communities specifically that KNET serves they're not large enough to actually support having educators on site. And they found creative solutions to be able to have coordinators, paid coordinators, not necessarily at the same degree and academic level of an educator, but actually having coordinators on site to allow students the opportunity to stay in very small communities and still participate in the learning experience. So I think that's really important to note, because it kind of comes back to that idea about creative solutions. So we're talking a lot about public policy and sort of missed marks there. We're talking a lot about misappropriated funds. We're talking about challenges related to connectivity. And I think I don't want to make this completely negative. Like, I want to kind of bring it back home again to that positivity. And that's, these creative solutions exist. Like, we can't continue to have panels like this where everyone's discussing various different challenges. Like, the reality is, like, these creative solutions are being deployed, whether or not we're aware of them, as somebody mentioned earlier in this panel. And I think KNET's an excellent example, Rob. So thank you for bringing that up, because I completely forgot about it until then.
There was a comment in the chat as well from Alan. Just going to read it because I think it's excellent. Exchanging the word learning for education expands the scope of the impact of digital literacy beyond formal education and works towards the democratization and lifelong and life-wide learning, which is absolutely awesome. It's true. Like, this is well beyond the scope of just the formal education system at any level, but this is how people are communicating and how people are learning, and how the internet itself is growing, and large populations are missing out on that. Everyone here is working in some aspect of it, and I think the important part here is that everyone, things are very focused on our own particular environment right now, but having an appreciation or an understanding of what's going on maybe a little bit farther out is, I think, a very important thing. And I think that having all of these different people and all, just even knowing and bringing forward some of the people who are working in these areas and who are doing great work don't necessarily get showcased all the time. So one of the things I wanted to do with the panel was to bring some of the great work that's happening forward and introduce you some names that are maybe hidden in a research paper somewhere, or in a Zoom call somewhere, or in a back room doing great stuff, or Ken on some highway north in the middle of nowhere in North Manitoba. The people are doing great work, and not everybody knows their names. I'm just gonna have one question before I just kind of bring this to a close, but Kirsten, I know you've been having some broadband issues, which is ironically perfect with the school, but your experience in your school division, and kind of, if you can give us a snapshot of what students and parents are doing just to maintain the minimum access to the stuff that is online, and to keep working in their current conditions. What I want to bring kind of home is that I don't think everyone really gets what that experience might look like.
Yeah, we'll go really, really quick because I know we have some really great guests that are going to be popping up right after us. Mountain View School Division continues to be committed to providing hard copy packages, and approximately 65% of our students are receiving programming through that way. So a very complex network of youth support workers, dedicated teachers, and dedicated support staff providing hard copy packages. We've also tried to install Wi-Fi hotspots in all 7 of our Mountain View School Division communities, especially our 4 schools who fall into communities that don't even have cell service. So these are some options that we're trying to build in for our stakeholders, but we recognize that there's going to be an ongoing discussion, and we're still going case by case with families to try and figure out the option that's not only accessible, but also sustainable for them.
Absolutely, and again, with the limited time, with the tip of the iceberg on this, but even understanding that in these communities, cellular is often the only option, if at all, or they're traveling to a long distance to get to a place. So one family car, or more than one kid, or other life impacts, these things all multiply, and they all tend to pile up on people who may already be disadvantaged for other reasons too. So economics and time and all of those types of things all start to really pile up, and that separation is getting wider. So it's definitely not just a technical problem, but there are definitely some technical solutions in that. And I think that the idea is that there is hope. There is money available, there is attention that is being shown to this. And I think that if we work together and continue to communicate and collaborate, and we can focus on the right things, we can start to really see some of these problems that we've been talking about for a really long time, really start bringing them to a close and make some progress. The basis of any network is better with more connections on it, right? We have, not only are these people who are disconnected not benefiting from the internet, but the internet itself is not benefiting from these people who are disconnected. So this is not just their issue, it's everyone's issue. So I have to bring it to a close just because of time, but I would just absolutely like to thank everyone on the panel, everyone who's doing work in this area, and everyone who's watching who's doing work in this area. I think that we are definitely going the right way, and we need to focus on this and make it all happen, and change the way that we learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Spencer, and thank you to Tech Manitoba and ICTC for all of you for putting this panel together. I think everyone would agree that the challenges and solutions that were discussed today would apply all across Canada. And just so everyone knows, these both today and yesterday were recorded and will be available on the Internet Society Canada chapter's website. And I think you'll see a lot of overlap with the connectivity panel as well. And Ken is he's a two-time Digital Access Day speaker because he was at our first annual Digital Access Day. So welcome back, Ken. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to jump to the next, we'll call it, it's a TED Talk with the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, one of the gold sponsors for today's event. I'm going to introduce Spencer Callahan, who's moderating this Q&A. He's Communications and Content Manager for CIRA. And we're going to have them talk about the importance of cybersecurity and that it really can't be overlooked as a point of access for digital access. Spencer?
Great. Thanks a lot, Franca. Mark, now you can't say I didn't get you a TED Talk because officially it's been declared this is your TED Talk. So you're welcome.
Infringed on copyright there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I probably shouldn't say that again. We're going to get sued. Yeah, thanks a lot, Franca. Yeah, I'm Spencer Callahan. I'm the Communications and Content Manager at Canadian Internet Registration Authority. And yeah, we're here to today talk about, cybersecurity and access. And I think it's something that needs to be discussed now more than ever when it comes to, what does it mean to actually have access and what does quality access look like? Some people may know that recently CIRA launched a brand new service called CIRA Canadian Shield. And it's a free service open to all Canadians. And it's one thing we're doing to try to help with that equation. So I've brought Mark Godet here today. Mark is our business lead for our cybersecurity products. And just wanted to have a little bit of a chat with Mark and talk a little bit about what access means when it comes to cybersecurity. So Mark, thanks for being here with me on your not TED Talk.
Thanks, Spencer. It's great to be here.
No problem. So I'm going to start off with sort of the big question right off the bat, which is why did CIRA launch Canadian Shield? It was a big step, I think, for the organization, for us, and just want to sort of go back and just get a little bit of the rationale as to what the reasoning was.
Sure. Just before we jump into that, just Canadian Shield is a free cybersecurity service. And what it does, it looks at all of the DNS queries coming out of someone's home or their laptop or a mobile device and compares them to a threat feed and allows or blocks them. So it blocks access to things like malicious sites, phishing sites, prevents botnets from operating and doing command and control. As well as it can provide, there's a family version of it, so it can block adult content. So it's a free cybersecurity service that's really effective and really easy to use. Once it's turned on, provides a good level of protection. And it's been a really exciting project to be involved with. And to go back to why did we do it? So there's a couple of reasons. One is need, and the other is mandate. So from a need perspective, 57% of Canadians on the internet have reported a cybersecurity incident. So that's from a StatsCan survey. So they're Canadians at home, at work, just individuals using the internet are targets and are getting hit with, phishing emails, viruses, computer infections. So there's a real problem of people just using the internet being exposed to threats. The second part is the reason we did it from a need perspective is privacy. So your DNS data tells everything about what you're doing on the internet, what applications you're doing, what IoT devices, whether you have an Amazon Alexa or a Roomba, everything, all the IoT devices are making queries and are identifiable from your DNS. So the DNS tells a lot where you shop, where you work. So having that data private is really critical as well. And for the most part, most Canadians don't know where their DNS data goes, how it's used, if it's being commercialized. So keeping that data in Canada and private was also one of the things we were trying to solve as well. And then from the second aspect is why CIRA. So we do have a mandate to try to build a better or more trusted internet in Canada. So I think it really fits with us. We have the capability. We've been operating a commercial DNS security service for the past 3 years, protecting hundreds of businesses, municipalities, universities, colleges. And we saw how effective DNS is as a layer of security. So really provides a really good level of protection, stopping malware, phishing, botnets with low effort. So in operating that service, we had the vision, can we make this available free to people at home? And we've been able to make that happen with the technical capability and some funding as a not-for-profit within CIRA. So yeah, it's been really an exciting project to launch, and we have over 100,000 Canadians using the service at this point, launched in April.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I know for me personally, working at CIRA, these are the types of projects I love to work on. So just the fact that we're offering that up to all Canadians and providing that access for free is really great. I want to talk a little bit about why cybersecurity is fundamental, because today's Digital Access Day. We're talking about digital access, and obviously for some people who are watching, they may be aware of some of the work CIRA does to promote digital access, things like rural broadband, which we've been very vocal about lately. My colleague Josh Tabish has been all over that and been doing a great job helping to promote that part of the equation. But how is cybersecurity fundamental to digital access? What's the overlap there between someone having access to the internet and cybersecurity?
Well, I think the first hurdle, getting over that hurdle for access and providing universal access to the internet is critical. But once you do have access, cybersecurity becomes a key requirement. For the DNS security we do, I kind of compare DNS to water. It's a utility, an essential part of accessing the internet. And without a service like Canadian Shield, it's like having unfiltered water. You're at risk of bringing in viruses, botnets, being phished, and turning on something like Canadian Shield is, I think, analogous to water filtration. Without it, your home is under a boil water advisory. You're getting an unclean internet, and that there's the onus. There should be some services that are provided to make the internet more secure for everyone. That's kind of built in, simple products like Canadian Shield. And we're seeing more partnerships. So we are partnering with the government. Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. They're providing us a threat feed and technical capability or technical advice on some threats. So I think having the government more involved to provide base levels of security on the internet and not leaving it wide open or the responsibility of people at home. So access is key, but secure access is even more important.
Right. And so I mean, obviously there's been a lot of discussion today and Digital Access Day and in other forums as well about bringing, it's interesting that you mentioned the water analogy, because I think a lot of people would say that, you know, you're talking about boil water advisories, and that's a great analogy, because there are some communities in our country, unfortunately, that are still in that scenario. And so what more can we do to help promote cybersecurity as a critical element of digital access? Because I feel like, you know, it's one thing to have access to water, let's say, but if you can't drink it or if it's not useful to you, it's really not enough. So what more can we do there to help promote that, other than your wonderful TED Talk today?
Well, I think one of the key things is awareness. So, you know, in addition to providing tools like Canadian Shield, some of our focus will be on increasing awareness of the cybersecurity risks and things you can do. So, you know, just providing those tools and then shifting the focus to training and awareness. So I think over the next year, you'll see from CIRA, we'll be partnering with other organizations to bring training resources that'll be targeted at just people working at home, seniors. We developed some material that was focused for remote working. So how to secure your home network to be more secure in your job when working from home. But I think awareness is going to be one of the critical things, just being aware of the risks and some of the things you can do to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I would mention there is, Mark, you mentioned earlier our partnership with the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, and they have a lot of great resources as well that people could check out to increase their awareness of these issues. I want to talk a little bit about the thing that we probably don't want to talk about anymore, which is COVID-19. You know, COVID-19 is essentially, it's impacted almost everything we do. But we've seen some specific impacts on how it's affected cybersecurity in Canada. And I'd just like to get your input on that and your perspective on how that's changed.
Yeah, so the pandemic creates an opportunity for hackers. So a lot of campaigns, the attack campaigns, use emotion. So with the pandemic, there's obviously an element of fear, and that becomes a leverage point. So receiving an email that says you have been exposed to COVID, click here, or one of your colleagues has, or how to get a free COVID test. Things like that are being leveraged. We're seeing those kind of phishing campaigns. And we just released a cybersecurity survey report. And in that, 30% of Canadian organizations reported an explicit COVID-related campaign against them. So some kind of COVID-themed cyber attack. So it just creates a new opportunity and a new attack point. And the other big thing with the pandemic is we're all at home. I'm in a shirt, but sweatpants below. But it's creating a different attack scenarios with people working from home, having devices on unsecure networks. So we're seeing a lot of education from companies to help their employees adjust to working at home and being cyber safe there. And a lot of organizations, including healthcare, remote work is new. So a lot of infrastructure being rolled out, VPNs, security for home devices, and many home devices or personal devices being used for work, which creates another opportunity for threats.
Right. You mentioned hospitals, and I think one of the things I want to talk about a little bit, and I wrote this question last night, and then I got some news that would help me today. This Canadian Center for Cybersecurity actually just released a report today saying that hackers are targeting data at places like schools and hospitals specifically in order to start developing, in order to data mine, in order to start creating profiles on people for phishing attacks and things like that. So what about our institutions? I mean, we've seen. Obviously, right now, hospitals and schools are critical elements of our infrastructure because due to the pandemic, they're some of the few places that kind of have to keep running. So what impact have we seen there? related to the pandemic and cybersecurity particularly?
Well, we do our DNS firewall. We do have a lot of educational organizations and hospitals using that service, and we've seen a big increase, like 39% increase in attacks against hospitals who are using our DNS firewall. So their importance is much elevated right now, so they become much more of a target, and it's unfortunate, but as their importance in this time is increased, that they become more of a target, and it's their attack vectors have increased with so many health workers even working remotely and trying to deliver services from home.
Right. Okay. And yeah, just one last question, and I guess I'm not sure how much time we'll have afterwards, but if there are any questions from people watching, I'd be happy to sort of pitch them to Mark. I've got one here asking about the cardboard cutout behind me. Everyone should go check out our YouTube channel. This is the Sarge from our ad campaigns for .ca. So go check out our YouTube channel and you can find out more about this guy. Just last question. You mentioned, you talked about DNS privacy earlier, and obviously at CIRA, we know a lot about the DNS, but it's not well known in sort of general public circles. Can you walk me through a little bit about what DNS privacy means and why it's important for Canadians to understand it?
Sure. So I've turned on the service at my home and looked at some of the data coming out of my house. So you'd be surprised during the day when no one's home, there's 200 DNS queries coming out of my house. So every time an application connects to something, or you connect to a website or send an email, it initiates a DNS query. So that data can be used commercially. It's used to figure out how to send ads, things like that to you, and tells a lot about what's happening inside your house. So keeping that data private is really key. And as CIRA, we think we're a trusted steward to keep that data private. But one of the things that has come out that can be leveraged, you can use our DNS firewall. We'll keep that data private. But there's another technology that's come out, is DNS over HTTPS. So you can turn that on in a browser, so Chrome or Firefox, and it will send encrypted DNS queries to our service. So even if someone is watching on the wire,
Mark, we lost your.
Sorry, must have accidentally leaned on the mute. So as you say, one of the new technologies that's come out is DNS over HTTPS, which normally DNS queries are unencrypted, but you can configure DNS over HTTPS in a browser, so in Chrome or Firefox, and the queries will go right from the browser to DNS, to Canadian Shield, and be encrypted and protected.
Great. I just going to give a minute to see if anyone has any other questions other than our cardboard cutout. His name is the Sarge again. Yeah, so thanks a lot to Franca for letting us be here today, for allowing us to be here. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in CIRA Canadian Shield to visit cira.ca/shield. Again, it's a free service. It's, we don't collect any data. It's just 100% something that we do just to keep Canadians safe and keep the internet more private and more secure. So I would encourage everyone to check it out. Right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Spencer. And thank you, Mark. When you're looking for partners to help raise awareness, we should have a chat, and maybe we can see what the Internet Society Canada chapter can do in addition to having you on a TED Talk.
That's great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care. So now I'd like to introduce Jeremy DePoe and Natasha D'Souza. We have a second panel with representatives from CIRA. I guess it's not a panel, but I won't call it a TED Talk this time. But we have Natasha, who's product manager of IoT security at CIRA, and Jeremy DePoe, who are going to be discussing mitigating IoT security threats for consumers. Jeremy, from the perspective of the Internet Society Canada chapter project we've been working on, and Natasha's going to talk about what they're doing at CIRA.
All right, I'm going to ask Brent, I think, to kick it off with a few
Oh,
words.
sorry, Brent. I didn't introduce Brent Arnold. Brent is partner at Gowlings, and he will be moderating this discussion.
Thanks, Franca, and thanks for everyone hanging in till 3:30 on a Friday the 13th, staying with us to talk about these important subjects when you could be doing Zoom cocktails with other people in rectangles on your screen. So thanks for hanging in with us. And I'm looking forward to a couple of interesting discussions. I'm a breach coach and a litigator who defends data breach class actions by trade. So this is a fascinating subject for me. And we're here to talk about mitigating IoT security threats for consumers. And it's not a new problem. We started to touch on some of the particularly frightening aspects of pandemic related security issues just in the last talk. And just to set the table for the presentations we're going to have, earlier this month, Nokia came out with its recent threat intelligence report, and it's reporting that for 2020 so far, 32.7% of all platform infection rates are IoT devices. That's up from last year. It's up for Android devices. It's even up for iPhones, which is a bit of a surprise. They're predicting that the number of attacks on IoT devices are going to continue, and the intensity is going to be high because there are higher adoption rates of IoT devices, especially now that everyone's remote deployed. Infection rates are varying depending on the visibility of those IoT devices to the internet. Higher infections they're seeing for IoT devices assigned to public-facing addresses, IP addresses. And as we've probably heard throughout the last couple of days, we're seeing evidence that hackers are waging opportunistic attacks, preying on people's fear and desire for information about the pandemic, fake COVID maps, things like this, as we were hearing even as early as April. And so this is where a lot of the attack activity against IoT devices is coming from. And Nokia also predicts that with the advent of the 5G ecosystem, there are going to be even more opportunities for novel and large-scale attacks on IoT devices. So this is definitely time for us to be talking about this. So as we're already short on time, I'm just going to launch right in and let Jeremy talk about what's on his mind, and then we'll launch right into Natasha. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions to the end, and if you want to put them in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat, when you put them into the chat, they get buried in with the ones that say, Brent, your microphone is muted. This way we'll be able to see that they're questions from you, and we want to make sure we get to those. So thanks a lot. And Jeremy, why don't you take us away?
Thanks a lot, Brent. Real privilege to be here. And this is my third Digital Access Day. So glad to be part of the third annual event. I want to thank Franca for being such a big part of the Mitigating Against IoT, Consumer IoT Cyber Threats project. And also our funding sponsors that include the US Embassy in Canada, Ryerson, Amazon Web Services, our supporting partners like Cyber New Brunswick, the Australian and British High Commissions in Ottawa, Cybersecurity Threat Exchange, CIO Strategy Council, U Group, Cybersecurity Canada, 12 Dots, Sharing Risk, and the Security Partners Forum. So we really appreciate all that involvement because what it's done is adhere to what we were projecting to do, which was a multi-stakeholder project. And that's one of the key insights I'd like to share from all of the information that we've gained in our 3 events so far with about 35 different subject experts. And one of the things that was clearly highlighted by Nazli Shukri, political science professor from MIT, was the gap in civil society engagement in this particular discussion. And so that is something that we're working to solve for, and it's all of those partners that I mentioned that are contributing to that, all in their own way. One key thing that's important to highlight out of all this is the fact that the consumers, when we look at the role of consumers, we've heard Spencer, I think, talk a lot about things that would mirror the journey that we've been on. And that is that there certainly is opportunity with consumer awareness. There is lots of work being done, but there are challenges there. And I'll refer to a recent experience I had. We were up in a First Nations community trying to hook up the community to the internet so that the children could have access to agility and learning. And we were with about 70 teachers and support workers. And the question was asked, what is cybersecurity? Or do you know what cybersecurity is? And the answer was there's four. Four people rose their hand. And when I look at my friends and my family, we can certainly see the kind of, there's other things more important in my life, other stressors, other things I want to be concerned about than cybersecurity. So that leads into another thing which challenges the work that's being done to raise cyber hygiene. And that is probably a psychological effect and a psychological desire to compartmentalize that concern. I don't want to worry about that. I've got other things to worry about. So that took us on the journey of saying, okay, we got to really look at small business, big business, government, organizations, civil society, and what we can do to complement those other activities. And what we found is that standards are a key part of that discussion. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, Cybersecure Canada, the CIO Strategy Council, many organizations like the ISO are working hard on this, and yet there are some challenges. There are great opportunities to provide guidance. The challenges are harmonization and the challenge between jurisdictions, as well as the ability for a company to navigate that process, especially when you're small. And I'll just use the example of Casa Energy, which was on our recent panel, which went the extra mile. It was an ethical and moral decision that took tremendous buy-in from this organization to go that extra mile and get a certification. So that's really important when we think about incentives, because it was an expense for them and it was a very difficult decision. So not all companies are certainly fall under that umbrella and are doing that. I went out today and I was in a hayfield, and the reason I bring that up is exactly what Spencer was talking about, and the intersection between what's happening in the home and how the carryover, the transference to the office environment. And the reason I was in the hayfield was I was kind of looking around, and what we've noticed here in New Brunswick is a huge shortage. We had a big drought, and hay is really important to feed cattle, and everybody was grasping and running to get as much hay as possible for the winter. What is relevant is what IoT devices can do to measure soil saturation, et cetera. And farmers are already high adopters of technology using GPS to plant corn, or I think one of the first early adopters was the dairy sector. So you have farmers using these devices, monitoring these devices and going to the home and doing all that at home. Similarly, we brought up COVID. You have people working from home with perhaps a computer that's from a government entity. It's hooked up to the home Wi-Fi. The home Wi-Fi is hooked up to a bunch of IoT devices. That device is transferred from the home for 3 days of work to the office for 2 days of work. So, and then we have the bring your own device issue. So the other couple things I'll just mention briefly is labeling. That is something that we've talked a lot about, great insights. and how that could have an impact. But we've also talked about over labeling and the burden sometimes that is on consumers when they're actually looking for functionality and cost. Lastly, but not leastly, is the geopolitical environment and the wild west of cyber warfare and misinformation. And we've got of note, which is some of our international experts brought up. I remember Tammy Schultz from the U.S. Marine War College and Jonathan Freed, the former advisor of the Prime Minister, speaking about nuclear proliferation treaties, landmine proliferation treaties. I have a fly going around my screen. And the fact that we're really in the Wild West and we have offensive operations by our allies, including Cyber Command, which is really unleashed under the Trump administration. And we have, of course, ongoing attacks from not our allies. So that discussion about creating non-proliferation treaties in this space, in this warfare domain, is something that's interesting from us. So sorry for going on, and I'll give it over to you, Brent.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And folks, start popping your questions into the Q&A. And with that, Natasha, why don't you tell us more about what you're working on with CIRA?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
You're good.
Okay. So what I want to talk to you about today is the CIRA Secure IoT Registry. And this really came about following up a lot about what Jeremy talked about. There's no security standards and a culmination of a series of factors. You know, we are heading towards trillions of devices by 2035. And how do you take IoT security at scale? So those of you that had mobile devices in the 90s will probably remember the SIM cards that were probably as big as a credit card. And over the years, they've evolved to something smaller than a penny. So although that technology evolution has enabled a lot of services as we see today, we still have a lot of roadblocks because the security credentials are put on them digitally. They're hard-coded. You have to change SIM cards if you change providers. You have to physically go into a store to activate it. So with the evolution of eSIMs is that you can remotely provision these IoT devices, you can change their service provider, and you can also provide multiple profiles on one device. And the other analogy I'd like to use is kind of where what we have with the internet today and domains. You can purchase a domain from GoDaddy, and if you want to transfer it to another provider, you have the capability of doing that. As well as if you sell your business, you can transfer it to another owner. So by leveraging these eSIMs, we're able to allow these trillions of IoT devices to be switched between other service providers, owners. So in the world of smart cities or the energy grid, this comes in very handy. So one of the recommendations coming out of the study that Jeremy was pointing out were standards. So yes, we're building the standards. There's the IETF, which is for general internet standards. And the one that's of particular interest is the GSMA IoT Safe. So mobile operators from around the world and registrars around the world are cooperating, and they've come out with the first draft of this standard. So GSMA, just to give a bit of background, is a standard that is used by mobile operators around the world. So when you travel from one country to another, or if you travel across Canada, you're able to roam and use your mobile device. So they're now focusing on the future. So CIRA has done something pretty powerful. We're not only contributing to standard, we've also built a proof of concept. We've participated with Elspark, Solus, TELUS, and BlackBerry, and we created a medtech platform So in about 6 months, we're gonna get some really valuable insights and data into what parts of the standard need to be updated, what is valid, and everything. And the idea behind this is because of COVID, the path to telehealth and the timelines have been accelerated significantly. So what does a CIRA Secure IoT Registry do? It does three things very simply. It allows zero-touch registration, activation, and transfer. So the registry is sort of the heart of this whole ecosystem. So the IoT devices will have an IoT safe eSIM on them, and will communicate with the registry via the mobile network operators, and any provisioning or any information transfer will happen over the air. And it also enables a secure TLS connection between that IoT device and their service provider. So we are still leveraging DNS. We've created a new root of trust. So that's using a combination of DNSSEC, eSIM, our IoT security applet, and cloud service providers. So today, we have IANA, we have the root zone, and we have the .ca zone. And in our future, we're going to have an IoT registry.ca zone. So in terms of what it is we're doing next, we are currently working with TELUS, but we're now looking to work with other mobile network operators across Canada. And we'd also like to partner with some IoT manufacturers or service providers to run some pilot projects. And we're more than happy to do a live demo demonstrating how our IoT registry works. So if anybody is interested in anything that we're doing, feel free to contact us.
All right, well, that's an excellent invitation for the folks out there watching. Thank you for that. Let me be expansive and reductive at the same time. I'm going to ask a fairly wide open question just to sort of get people's thoughts on this. We've touched on a lot of the different challenges and a lot of the things that are being worked on. What do each of you think is the single biggest challenge to achieving a secure IoT environment?
Sorry, I was on mute. I think it's sharing. I think that what we're seeing some success with is the sharing operations centers. So the National Electricity Reliability Corporation in the United States that Canada is also a part of, CCTX, that's the work they're doing, as well as CyberNB's Transparency Center. Also the great work of the Citizen Lab and Chris Parsons there, which has now become world renowned, recently cited by Snowden himself.
Right.
What these sharing operations centers do, though, is they allow companies in certain sectors or collectively to come together in perhaps a confidential setting and share information. So share the cyber intrusions or experiences that they're having. That information is extremely valuable for everybody around the table to collectively protect their interests. And it also allows to work closely with the agencies and authorities when there are attacks. So sometimes when there is an attack, you don't want to necessarily send out a press release. Sometimes you want to, the good folks working on these things want to, keep an eye on things a little bit. So that can be done in coordination under those organizations and sharing. So that sharing and trust building, I think, is probably one of the biggest things that are helping us overcome.
So some of the things that Sarah is working on is we're involved with various committees within Canada. And so these working groups are not just government, they're public-private partnerships. We're teaming up with various other tech companies to kind of identify these issues and find solutions to them. At the global level, we're also working with other registrars around the world to create their own IoT registries. And then we're also working with the security experts to leverage some of the latest innovation around crypto and any of the great innovations that they have. And in fact, that is part of our IoT registry solution today as well.
Well, those are both encouraging answers. Thank you. And I have more questions, but I know we have a hard stop in 3.5 minutes. I'm seeing no questions in the Q&A, and perhaps people are getting ready to go off to their Zoom cocktails. I'm going to first of all, say thank you both for really interesting presentations. And I'm going to throw it back to Franca for some closing remarks. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, Natasha, and Brent. Really appreciate it. It's good to see our project information highlighted and to hear about, I'm really excited about this registry. Anyways, I think we should talk more about it within our IoT project. So thank you again. I'd like to thank all of the people who joined us today. I would like to thank our sponsors once again, the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, for their presenting sponsorship, ISOC Global for their platinum sponsorship, and CIRA and iPolitics for their gold sponsorship. I'd also like to reiterate Lynn's message from the top, which is if you care about an affordable, accessible internet, help support us, become a member, internetsociety.ca, $20. Not prohibitive. We would really appreciate your support. So everyone, go enjoy your Friday evening, and we'll be in touch with our next event.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.